A former merchandiser, deeply disillusioned with people, often found himself contemplating how contradictory human nature is. During moments of isolation, he would suddenly feel an overwhelming desire to erase his existence from this world, turn off his phone, delete his accounts, vanish completely. However, surrendering to his melancholy, he always returned to his routine life, never understanding why these urges tormented him. People, their actions, and their words had long taught him to live cautiously, as if in chains from which there was no escape. But a sudden lottery win gave him the chance to break free from this vicious cycle. He quit his job, moved to a quiet town in Hokkaido, and became involved in farming. At the time, it seemed like the only right path, dictated by the flow of time itself. He cursed aloud, realizing he had been transported to another world that resembled an RPG. The unfamiliar landscapes, strange architecture, and bizarre creatures around him only intensified his confusion. Turning around sharply, he shouted, asking what kind of place this was. He sighed in relief and decided that, for now, that was enough. Stretching his arms upward like he was yawning, he said, "Freedom is wonderful." His thoughts returned to this strange world. Everything seemed so odd and unfamiliar, yet exciting. At first, he had panicked when he found himself here, but soon decided that he would manage somehow. Fortunately, during all this chaos, he was transported along with his chicken coop and a shed for farming tools. The eggs the chickens laid were edible, and the tools were perfect for gathering wild, edible plants. He figured he wouldn't starve anytime soon. And yes, if we're talking about another world, there's of course magic and abilities. He tried various chants and poses, hoping to provoke some kind of reaction. And then, evaluation. He tried the fruit and saw information appear before his eyes. Duran fruit. He concluded that his skill was indeed working, but had a limitation. Detailed analysis was only possible for things he intended to eat. Thinking it over, he wondered if boiling this fruit with a magical herb called virgin might create something useful. Noticing a monster, he immediately began luring it into a trap he had prepared earlier, deliberately backing away. Shouting loudly, he tried to grab the creature's attention and lead it to follow him. As soon as the monster stepped into the trap, the hero exclaimed that it had worked. The hero, satisfied that the trap had worked, looked at his character menu, where he saw a stat increase from leveling up from level 2 to level 3. When he had leveled up from 1 to 2, the sudden appearance of the status window had scared him, but now it no longer surprised him. However, seeing his new level, he felt disappointed and thought that level 3 seemed too weak. By defeating monsters, the hero could evaluate them. The status window that appeared indicated that this was a non-human creature inhabiting the entire Lancaster region. He pondered, wondering if it was a goblin or if the area was simply called Lancaster. Inspecting the loot, he decided to take only the equipment. However, he understood that in any situation, he should use everything that could be useful. After all, survival depended on it. The hero approached the workplace and immediately began to use the collected stones and medicinal herbs. First, he took a firestone, which has the property of fire, and a femtostone, which is used as a grinding material. After crushing both stones and mixing them thoroughly, he obtained an abrasive flame. If he polished the goblin's dagger with it, the result should be a fire dagger. The hero came to the conclusion that with the grinding material, it was possible to add properties to other types of weapons, which meant it was worth collecting as many useful resources as possible. The next step, he decided to take up herbs. He had Irene's healing herbs, the magical herbs of the Virgin, as well as the recently found fruit of the potato weed. Irene's herbs had a restorative effect and were used as an ingredient for potions. The petals of the magical herb of the Virgin contained components that restored magical power and energy. The hero carefully strained the resulting infusion and noted with satisfaction that the potion was a success. Its properties were quite impressive. It ensured the restoration of physical strength and the healing of medium-level wounds, and also replenished magical powers and energy. However, he understood that ordinary medicinal herbs act too slowly, require a large amount for intake, and create certain difficulties. Now he was interested in another idea, to try to make a potion from the poisonous herbs Badur and Gadel. If they were turned into a potion, it would be able to be absorbed faster and begin to act immediately. The hero knew that the herb badar deprives physical strength, and Gadel clouds the mind and causes hallucinations. This could give very interesting results. The hero thought about the need to evaluate the potion and suggested that it could be combined with an antidote. Having made his decision, he drained the potion and then ate the herb marlene, which neutralized the toxins of the poisonous herbs Gadel and Badur, and also weakened the effects of other mildly poisonous substances. However, the body could not withstand the test. The hero collapsed to the ground. Sitting down and trying to come to his senses, he bitterly realized that if anyone was watching him now, they probably considered him a complete fool. The hero came to the conclusion that the potion was quite a strong poison, and decided to use it in battle, coating the tips of his arrows with it. Then his thoughts turned to the possibility of growing plants. If the herbs dug up with their roots were planted in ordinary soil, they could probably be successfully grown. However, suddenly realizing something important, he exclaimed sharply, realizing that this was not just poison but real bait. The hero noticed the changes, and said that the shine of the chicken wings had become much better after he gave the chickens some herbs to try. Intrigued, he reached out to one of the chickens and activated Evaluate. It soon became clear that the chicken had turned into a grass chicken, and its meat now had nutritional, physical strength restoring, and detoxifying properties. Astonished by the result, he exclaimed in disbelief. The thought of whether tonic herbs could interact with medicinal herbs immediately flashed through his mind. The hero noted that it was good that he had already cut up the chicken carcasses, cooking the roast chicken on the fire which he had previously given the healing herbs to try. When the first piece ended up in his mouth, he could not contain his admiration and noted how delicious it was. Enjoying every piece of the cooked chicken, he exclaimed that its life was not in vain. After burying the remains of the chicken, the hero made a small makeshift grave, and noted with slight sadness that a piece of this life would remain in this world. Then he took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts, and reminded himself that he needed to go to the city and sell everything he had created. He understood that there were many things that, as an ordinary Japanese man, he could not make with his own hands, which meant that he needed to get rich to buy them. Having assessed the upcoming journey, he noted that the road there and back would take 3 hours, a considerable distance, but this did not change his determination to go to the city. He said tiredly, barely moving his legs, that he was not used to walking such long distances and that his legs were like sticks. Noticing an old man leading a horse, he wondered if he could buy one in the city. Having reached the city gates, he approached the guard and confidently declared that he was a merchant. The guard answered something, but the hero only blinked in confusion. He still did not understand what he was saying. Raising the potions and herbs in front of the guard, the hero let him know that he was a merchant, and the guard let him through without asking any questions. He still did not understand the language of the locals, but he did not see any particular need to memorize it completely. He reasoned that if he knew the words sell, buy, thank you, simple greetings, and also understood numbers, then there would be no problems with trade transactions. With this thought, he confidently headed deeper into the city. There was also a so-called adventurers guild in this city, which he joined by pure chance. Inside the guild there was a notice board with tasks, as well as a cash desk where you could get information about achievements and rewards. Entering inside, the hero went straight to the notice board, carefully examining the tasks that hung on it. The hero was mainly engaged in catching long-toothed sea bass, and therefore he had a choice: either submit or join forces with someone and fight. In addition, he did not understand the local language, which only complicated the situation. After leaving the Adventurers Guild, the hero suddenly heard someone calling out to him. 2 people called out to him, a petty trader and a dealer in weapons and armor named Margot. These were people who were especially cared for in this city. After greeting them, the hero took out and showed off a fiery dagger. The weapons dealer immediately became interested and, opening his eyes wide, loudly declared that he was buying a dagger. The hero immediately realized that weapons with special properties were very popular in this world. The hero decided to sell the fiery dagger to Margot, which made the merchant's wife angry at him, her eyes flashing with displeasure. However, this did not bother him. He could create more such daggers. The merchant Margot tried to say something, and the hero, having caught the general meaning of the conversation, realized that he was being asked if he wanted to move to the city. However, his answer was unambiguous. He rejected their offer, not intending to change his solitary existence. The repeated impulses to break with everything that had gripped him in the previous world could manifest themselves here too. He never knew when it would happen. He was really bad at building relationships with people, and this had not changed even after the migration. However, now he had saved up enough gold coins to buy himself a horse, and he tried to communicate this by writing it on a small board with chalk. It seemed that the language of this country was called Lancaster. If you use the skill appraise on a sentence written in Japanese, it will be displayed in Lancaster. The translation took time, but at least it was possible to communicate in writing. The merchant Sarasa gave a sign that she would help with the purchase of a horse. The hero decided to rely on Sarasa. Sarasa went somewhere, leaving him perplexed, but he decided to wait, believing that it would be better that way. Lady Sarasa soon returned, leading a horse, surprising the hero with her speed. He handed her the gold coins, took the horse, and decided that it would be much easier to return home with it. Having finished all his business in the city, he said goodbye to the merchant Margot and Lady Sarasa, and then headed back. Margot and Sarasa followed the hero all the way to his plot, which did not cause him much delight. Having bought a horse, he also acquired a stable, so they immediately built him a place to keep it. Moreover, they even offered to build him a forge, which completely confused him. He thanked them and froze in a slight daze, trying to comprehend what had happened. He rejected life in the city, fearing the same sudden impulses that had haunted him in the past. Trapped in his own shell, he involuntarily distanced himself from people. However, Margot and Sarasa, despite everything, continued to gently break through his walls, as if not wanting to leave him alone. Here, everything was already going beyond the framework of simple business relations. He felt something more, although he could not or did not want to realize it. Nevertheless, he did not seek to create new shackles that went beyond what was necessary. He even began to acquire some plans and concerns. Still, he would need to properly thank these two later. The extension was completed, and the hero had reached the level of a merchant farmer. His new horse, Ronant, also appreciated the stable, slowly exploring his new home. According to the design of Margot and Sarasa, merchants from the world of Lancaster, a forge and stable were added to his farm, which included a chicken coop and a barn for agricultural tools. The hero noted that he now had enough space to store the items he had created. He thought that he would be able to calmly forge and prepare elixirs without worrying about monster attacks. Deciding to test his new capabilities, he began preparing a decoction, carefully boiling the magical herb virgin and the antidote herb morena. The hero studied the result of his work with interest and noted that he had obtained a new type of potion, a magical restoration with the neutralization effect of a medium level of poison, albeit in small quantities. He thought about dividing it into parts, leaving one for personal use and putting the other up for sale. Inspecting the forge, he noted that now it was possible not only to make reserves, but also to seriously engage in production. His skill as a blacksmith was at its best, but the question remained whether it was worth expanding the production of attribute weapons. However, before making important decisions, he decided to think about how to thank Margot and Sarasa. The hero thought about gratitude, but he didn't know what exactly he could do for Margot and Sarasa. A treat? Dinner? He even had some salt. Perhaps he could offer them some? Thinking back to the shops in Resta City, he noted that they mostly sold shelf-stable foods, such as dried meat and hard bread. If he had fresh ingredients, it would certainly bring more joy. He wondered if he could use the leafy plants as house herbs and divide the meat between 3. If you include the chicken, then a full dinner would require at least 2. However, he knew that eating more would reduce the egg collection. And the eggs of the grass chicken were not only nutritious, but also restored physical strength, having a detoxifying effect. The hero wasn't interested in hunting as a farmer, but he still thought about going after some prey. At least a rabbit. He thought he could handle it. Noticing that one of his traps had caught something, he hurried to check. It turned out that the trap had caught a monster that resembled a wolf. That was just in time. Having received a level increase, the hero wondered if this made him a cheater, if the level could increase in this way. First of all, he used the skill Evaluation and found out that in front of him was a wolf monster living all over Lancaster. It seems to him that this creature could well be useful as food. The hero was saved by the dismantling shop attached to the guild, because, as expected, He was inexperienced in cutting up a wolf. Now he had time to wait. While he was waiting, he decided to look through the quests on the bulletin board. Looking through the tasks, he noticed one notable quest. Chicken? No, an assignment to pacify. But who is Cockatrice? The pacification mission had nothing to do with him, but suddenly the hero was approached by the administrator of the Adventurers Guild named Dan. He still didn't understand what he was saying, but he could only hear the word Kai. What could that mean? Should he follow him? The hero used assess on the sign and found out that it was a dojo. The martial arts instructor turned out to be Kai, who greeted him as Keigo. Okuda. The hero had a premonition that something important could happen among these events. After greeting them, he wondered if he could learn any skills here, since he had long wanted to master combat techniques for self-defense. The hero decided to express his gratitude first, and quickly thanked Kai. Watching the dojo leader, he saw how he destroyed the dummy with one blow, and tried to estimate the power of this blow. Leader Kai held out a wooden sword, indicating that the hero could try. He took the weapon, assumed a fighting stance, and the sword in his hands began to glow. He then struck the dummy. The hero acquired the skill Strike. After thanking Kai, he noticed a sign on his way out of the dojo and decided to translate it. The text stated that due to the excessive number of deaths among adventurers caused by monster attacks, martial artist Kai was giving free instruction in combat strikes to newcomers. The hero was amazed by the strength of Master Kai's strike, realizing that such techniques could be quite useful depending on one's level of training. He was grateful that visiting the dojo had allowed him to learn about the possibility of acquiring skills beyond appraisal. After collecting food ingredients to prepare a meal as a token of gratitude for Margot and Sarasa, he headed home. On the way home, the hero noticed a stone statue of a goblin, and then his gaze stopped on Cockatrice. Realizing the possible danger, he signaled his horse to pick up the pace. Having run into the barn, the hero hugged the chicken and, sitting by the door, trembled with fear, crying. Hearing a knock, he shuddered, but then thought, could it be a person? The hero opened the door with apprehension and, seeing the merchant Sarasa in front of him, hugged her tightly, not holding back his tears. Feeling relieved, he burst into tears even more. The merchant's wife, hearing his sobs, asked him again if he was scared. The hero continued to cry until he noticed Margot and another unfamiliar face nearby. Gradually, he tried to pull himself together, feeling awkward because he looked so pitiful in front of a person he saw for the first time. Margot mentioned the Cockatrice, and the hero remembered the quest, wondering if Margot, Sarasa, and the stranger who looked like an adventurer would go to pacify this monster. Gradually calming down, he decided to simply rely on them. The hero had no idea about the current situation, but he understood that he could make his contribution by preparing and handing over the weapons and medicines he had stockpiled. Having handed over everything necessary, the hero watched as Sarisa showed a drawing of a plan to pacify Cockatrice, explaining their next steps. The hero asked in confusion if they wanted him to attack with a bow. He was confused as to why he was the one involved in this whole hustle and bustle of subduing a Cockatrice. Unlike the others, he had recently been an employee of a trading company in another world. In this game-like world, it seemed unreasonable to risk his life, even if he was told to. Margot, Sarasa, and the unknown adventurer tried to cheer Keigo up, trying to instill confidence in him. They explained that it would be safer to work together, and assured him that they would not allow the Cockatrice to harm him. Keigo knew that giving in to fear and doing nothing would accomplish nothing. He also knew that his chances of survival alone were slim. By preparing to subdue the Cockatrice, he sincerely hoped that he would be able to return home alive. Upon seeing the Cockatrice, the hero noted how huge it was. At that moment, he couldn't help but envy Sarasa, who had stayed behind to watch over the house. After making sure that Margot and the adventurer were in their positions, he focused on the battle ahead. The hero took aim with his bow and fired a poisoned arrow, hitting the Cockatrice. This signaled to his allies that it was time to go on the offensive and begin the attack. Having defeated the Cockatrice, the hero noticed that his allies were probably of a higher level than he was. At that moment, the monster noticed him, began to charge an attack, and the hero realized that he would not be able to dodge the blow. The adventurer pushed the hero in time, and thanks to this, they managed to partially evade the Cockatrice's attack. After being attacked by the Cockatrice, the hero noticed that his body was slowly starting to be covered in stone. At that moment, Margot, defending the adventurer and Kikaku, loudly mentioned the detoxification potion. Realizing the need for immediate action, the hero took out the potion, handed it to the adventurer, and hurriedly drank his own. Margot pinned cockatrice's muzzle to the ground. The hero realized that he couldn't do without a double counterattack. Although he was inferior in strength, he had a chance. If he attacked at the same time as the adventurer, using the skill strike, they could win. Gathering his courage, he grabbed the weapon. Having calmed down and concentrated, he and the adventurer struck at the same time, putting all their strength into it. After a combined counterattack, their blow hit its target. The cockatrice let out a final deafening scream and collapsed, completely losing its strength. The hero and the adventurer, breathing heavily, realized that the battle was over. The cockatrice was pacified. Higo Okuda had been promoted to a higher level. He was shocked and couldn't believe that their party had actually managed to subdue the cockatrice. Realizing what had happened, he was still confused when the adventurer came closer and finally introduced himself. Although Kigo still didn't understand most of what was said, he clearly caught the name Juno. Overcoming his confusion, he expressed his gratitude to both Juno and Margot for their help in the battle. The hero reflected that even if the allies were powerless individually, the combined efforts of the three had allowed them to achieve victory. He realized that one of the arrows, perhaps himself, was much more fragile than it seemed at first glance. Maybe this time he was just lucky? However, what worried him most was not this, but the impulses hidden within him that made him think about ending all this once and for all. In honor of the victory over the strongest cockatrice, a small celebration was held. As a token of gratitude, Keigo treated Margot, Sarasu, and Juno. This time he added garlic and salt to the meat, although even without these seasonings, it turned out to be quite tasty. He suggested that everyone eat as much as they wanted and take their time, enjoying the meal. Keigo believed that a well-cooked meal could convey a variety of feelings. He brought more drinks, wanting to maintain the warm atmosphere of the feast. Deep down, he felt sincere gratitude to Juno for helping him tame the cockatrice, and to Sarasa and Margot for building the stable and forge, which had become invaluable support to him. During the meal, they noticed blue wolves approaching their camp. The hero noticed that there were 3 of them, and assumed that the predators had come, attracted by the smell of the food he had prepared. The hero reasoned that the appearance of strong monsters in response to the smell of food is quite an expected phenomenon. He noted that if they do not show aggression, then there is no point in attacking them. Keigo's companions understood his intentions and decided to ignore the blue wolves, continuing their meal. However, the hero noticed Sarasa looking at him with a smile and mentally asked her to stop laughing so much. He thought about how it was better to remain neutral and try not to sow unnecessary hostility around himself. After everything he had to endure, he did not want to become easy prey again. The main thing in this world is not to defeat enemies, but to be able to survive. That is why it is worth eliminating any possible risks. After sending his companions back to the city, the hero began cleaning up after the meal. He thought he had managed to thank Margot, Sarasa, and Juno, and at the same time he had trained a little. Taking a look at the field where the blue wolves had recently been, he decided to prepare himself in case they came closer to his territory. Having dug holes and built a kind of nest trap out of them, the hero carefully laid bunches of poisonous herbs on top and hid, waiting for the return of the blue wolves. Keigo decided to set up a rattle alarm around his property, which he made himself, in case the blue wolves decided to drop in on him. Keigo to do was set up the tiger trap he had purchased from the guild, and set it up. Once he had completed the traps, he was convinced that he was now safer, and his chances of survival had increased significantly. Even though he lived on the outskirts, Keigo decided to leave a warning sign to let others know that people lived here and that they could be dangerous. He had done everything necessary outside. Now all that was left was to put away the tools. He thought about repairing the hut, but first decided to make a shield. Keigo breathed a sigh of relief, comparing the completion of the cleaning to any other tedious task. Once you start, you can't stop. He noticed that the boards were completely gone, but that wasn't a surprise, since he had managed to make many things with them today. His house may have been a small hut resembling a chicken coop, but now it was his own home, made with his own hands. Dinner finally arrived, and Keigo prepared a blue wolf steak, seasoned with Urina's medicinal herbs and a pinch of salt. To accompany the dish, he decided to drink a Milanese fruit liqueur that went well with the meat dishes. Although it was the same food as lunch, the taste was still delicious. Hearing the alarm go off, Kigo wondered if these were the wolves that had been roaming around during the day. Frightened, he grabbed his weapon and slowly walked out of the hut, hoping that these were just people who needed something, and not the same predators he had noticed earlier. Kigo left the hut. He saw that a blue wolf had fallen into one of the traps. His hopes were dashed. These were not humans. Realizing that he had to deal with the remaining member of the pack first, he drew his bow and fired an arrow straight at the wolf stuck in the trap. There were still 2 wolves left. Kigo began to look around cautiously, but to his surprise, he did not see any other members of the pack nearby. This made him wary. They could not have just disappeared. He peered into the darkness, trying to catch the slightest movement, realizing that the remaining predators could be hiding somewhere nearby and preparing to attack. Suddenly, the wolves pounced on him from both sides. Kigo barely had time to react. His heart began to beat faster, and his body tensed, preparing to defend itself. He knew that if he failed to cope with this attack, he would be in serious danger. The hero plunged his sword into one wolf with one movement, and with the second, using his shield, knocked another one right into the trap nest. Pulling the sword out of the fallen wolf, the hero realized that adrenaline had overwhelmed him, completely drowning out his fear, despite the horror of the situation. Now there was only one wolf left. The hero shouted out the command to attack, used the skill Strike, and with one powerful blow defeated the last blue wolf. Kigo, feeling his level increase after defeating the wolves, lay down on the grass and looked up at the sky, thinking about how close death was. He even thought about writing a suicide note. Seriously, no matter how much power he had in this world, it was still not enough. Hearing the rustling, Kigo jumped to his feet, preparing for another battle, or so he thought at first. However, upon closer inspection, he noticed something that caught his attention. The little puppy that came with the pack saw the body of his mother and for a moment became sad, looking at her. However, noticing the hero, he suddenly became cheerful and began to run around him happily, as if nothing had happened. The hero understood that the wolves were going to kill him, and although their attack was inevitable, now only one puppy remained from the entire pack, which he held in his arms. Looking at the puppy, the hero realized that he could not take its life. Bowing to the dead she-wolf, he decided to take responsibility for raising this baby. After that, feeling tired, he returned to the hut. With a heavy heart and feeling tired, he lay down, hugging the puppy, and soon fell asleep. Sarasa noticed the puppy and immediately began to cuddle it. The hero, seeing this, quickly shouted that the wolf cub was not for sale. Apparently, she really liked the baby. Skinning 3 wolves turned out to be a difficult task, so he asked Sarasa and Juno for help. Using the skill Appraisal on the fang of the blue wolf, the hero discovered that it could serve as an upgrade for a weapon. The hero sold everything that was left of the wolves. Even though they wanted to eat him, he still made a profit. After waking up, he used the skill Assessment on the puppy. It turned out that it belonged to a rare species of ash wolves, whose fur differed significantly from the fur of ordinary representatives of this genus. The hero thought that if the wolf cub grew up near people, there was a chance that he would not attack them. However, he understood that if the grown beast harmed people, he himself would have to take responsibility and kill him. He thought that if the wolf cub understood the fate of his parents, then perhaps a thirst for revenge would be born in his heart. The laws of this world were harsh. The weak became prey for the strong. But despite this, the hero firmly decided to make every effort to raise him differently. The hero decided to sew himself a cloak from the fur of an ash wolf. He liked this color, and besides, he believed that the wolf cub would be able to recognize him by the smell of his fur as one of his own. Having sent his companions back to the city, he was left alone with the puppy and thought about what name to give him. The hero chose the name Ash. This puppy became the first creature he could call his family in this new, unfamiliar world. The realization of this rolled over him like a heavy burden. A new life, new trials, new responsibility. Kigo understood that a difficult path awaited him. The hero quickly called out to the puppy, trying to stop him. Ash was trying to grab the chicken and had already managed to disturb the seedlings. From that day on, he had no time for despondency. He made an oath to Ash's parents that he would take responsibility for his upbringing. Ash was covered in mud again today. The hero sighed as he looked at the puppy and noted that if this continued, the water would quickly run out. Then he remembered that Margot had left some ingots and decided to see what could be made from them. After some effort, he managed to give them a certain shape. It took a long time to forge, but finally everything was ready. A heated bath. The hero realized with relief that he could now take a warm bath, because from the moment he got into this world, he only rubbed himself with cold water. Now, with the new transportation system, he could stock up on more water. Inspired, he exclaimed, "Forward, Ronanta!" The hero was pleased to note how spacious and calm this place was. The air seemed surprisingly fresh. Although he usually bought drinking water in the city, it was much more convenient to go to the lake for larger supplies. Looking around, he noticed monsters nearby that he had never seen before. However, if they were not aggressive, then there was nothing to worry about. The hero turned to the puppy, happily stating that they would soon get some water. However, Ash suddenly tensed up, and Kigo also sensed something was wrong. The unexpected blow made him reflexively put up a shield, but the force of the attack knocked him off his feet, and he fell right into the barrels. Cursing the situation, he tried to quickly recover. The hero instantly realized what he was up against, a water monster. While he was trying to recover, Ash charged, biting into the creature's back. Without wasting any time, Kigo pulled out his bow and fired, sending a poisoned arrow straight into the monster's knee. The monster was distracted when an arrow hit its knee, and Kigo took advantage of that moment, cutting off its head with a quick movement of his blade. As soon as it was over, he felt a surge of energy. The level had increased again. However, despite the apparent ease of victory, he understood that all this was only possible thanks to Ash. Using the appraisal skill on the fallen monster, Kigo found out that the creature was called Murnam, a water monster with the ability to use water magic. He wondered if the blow he had received was a water magic spell. If not for Ash's warning, he might not be standing in this place. Meanwhile, Ash ran up to him, holding something in his teeth. After assessing the find, Kigo realized that it was a Murnam scale. It turned out that it had the magical power of the water attribute and could be used as a material for enchanting items and transmitting water magic. After praising Ash for his resourcefulness and help in battle, Kigo finally decided that from now on, this wolf cub was not just a pet, but his real partner. Kigo, playing a symphony for Ash, noticed how the wolf cub was listening attentively, clearly enjoying the melody. Seeing such a reaction, he continued playing, happy that his music brought joy even in this new world. Later, during bath time, he played with Ash for a while in the bathtub. This moment seemed especially warm to him. Even though their life was full of difficulties, such simple joys made it easier. Kigo knew he needed to get stronger to protect Ash. However, he was concerned about whether the wolf cub's diet was nutritious enough. He fed him herbs and eggs, but he doubted that would be enough to support his development. Ash was certainly a cute creature, but he was still a wolf after all. Simply buying him food would hardly make him stronger. Kigo often went into town to buy jerky, but every trip was fraught with danger and pain. In the new world, even everyday tasks could become a challenge. Kigo decided to avoid useless battles. Today had shown him that there were monsters in this world that could use magic. It wasn't enough to simply defend against them. He needed to find a way to attack them effectively. He wondered if he should acquire a more powerful weapon to counter such threats. However, the thought seemed too troublesome. Perhaps it was better to leave such thoughts for now. If he was left alone, he would have to rely only on himself. Kigo saw meeting Ash as something destined for him. At least, he wanted to believe it was. Deep down, he was sure that he could protect the wolf cub and lead a peaceful life despite all the difficulties of this world. Now they could take hot baths whenever they wanted. However, Kigo couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. He sighed, knowing that there was nothing he could do until everything was dry. He glanced at the outfit he had bought in town. Every time he put it on, he was acutely aware that he was in another world. His nerves were making it hard to concentrate, but at least the goal of getting water had been accomplished. Now, all that was left was... Today, Kigeko decided to make a weapon. He started with great enthusiasm, although he knew it would not be easy. He had been practicing his blacksmithing for several days, working with scraps of iron. Now he wanted to succeed several times to be confident in his skills before he began working with the ashen wolf fangs, a rare material that Juno had obtained for him. As he melted down and used the iron ingots, Keigo noted that they were significantly more expensive than the scraps he had worked with before. After finishing his work, Keigo sighed in relief and looked at his creation with pride. He wanted to show the sword to Ash, but he, caught up in chasing a butterfly, did not even pay attention to it. Keigo grinned and switched to refining the handle. Using the skill appraisal, he found out that the weapon he had created was called the Wolverine Sword, a blade forged from hard precious iron and reinforced with the fang of an ashwolf. Having assessed the result, he noted to himself that it sounded quite impressive. Keigo thought with confidence that with such a weapon, he would definitely be able to protect Ash. Then he remembered the Murnam scale and the firestone he had recently found. Deciding that they could also be used, he thought about the processing method. He carefully crushed the scale and stone, mixing the dust, hoping that it would not cause an explosion. When nothing happened, he sighed in relief. But now the hardest part was ahead, tasting the result to activate appraisal. As soon as Keigo tasted the powder, his tongue seemed to vibrate, causing him to exclaim in surprise. Activating appraisal, he finally realized what he was dealing with. It was Thunder Demon Powder, capable of imbuing weapons with the effect of lightning. Realizing that the combination of the elements of fire and water did indeed create lightning, he immediately decided to test it on his Wolverine sword. Trying to be careful, he polished the blade with the resulting powder, then used appraisal again to check the result. The hero carefully examined the result of his work. Wolverine's Thunder Sword was a sword forged from solid precious iron, reinforced with an ash wolf fang and imbued with the element of lightning. Looking at his creation, he felt proud of his work, as if he had truly managed to create something truly amazing. All that was left was the final touch, to wrap the handle with insulating material so that he could safely hold the weapon with bare hands. Having finished the preparation, he looked at the sword with satisfaction and, turning to Ash, noted that the new weapon was finally ready. However, turning to the wolf cub, he discovered that he was already fast asleep, not having waited for the end of the work. The hero considered using magic, but realized that he should focus on strengthening his defense and improving his shooting skills first. He had reliable mentors in this matter. Since he had decided to protect Ash as a parent and partner, he had to continue to improve his defensive skills. In addition, relying solely on shooting was risky. The ingredients for the poison could sooner or later run out. That is why he decided to seek training from Master Kai to master the basics of effective defense in battle. The hero asked if he could keep the bow, and when he received an affirmative answer, he expressed his gratitude. Kai loaded the bow and carefully aimed at the dummy, releasing an arrow that glowed before the shot. Keigo was amazed to see how strong his teacher was. He knew Kai was skilled, but he hadn't expected this level of skill from him. Kai called out to him, asking him to try the technique. Kei responded affirmatively, focused, and tried to imitate his teacher's movements exactly. Channeling all his concentration into the shot, he activated the ability, shouting a command. The system reported that he had acquired the charged arrow skill. The shot was successful, but Keigo knew that it would take a lot of training to perfect the technique. Kai got Keigo's attention and announced that it was time to train his defense. He reminded him that it took not only strength, but also courage to confront an opponent. Keigo understood that all of this was necessary to develop his skills, and he was ready to accept the challenge. Without further ado, he charged, but the impact was much harsher than he expected. The blow landed on Kai's defense, and Keigo was surprised to see that it felt as strong as steel. Inspired, he prepared for a counterattack and activated his toughness ability, intending to test how much his own defense could withstand the next blow. After the blow, Keigo lost his footing and fell on his back. However, despite the pain, he felt a new understanding flash in his mind. The skill toughness was successfully acquired. All that was left was to continue training to bring it to perfection. Thanking the teacher, Keigo said goodbye and with new confidence thought that he would definitely succeed. Keigo knew that he had learned many new skills today, but he was getting tired with each passing minute. He knew that if he wanted to become stronger, he needed to train even more. At that moment, Sarasa called out to him. She handed him the cloak he had ordered. As expected, her work was impeccable. The quality was top-notch. Looking at Ash, Kigo thought, why was this so important to the wolf cub? But then he realized, this cloak was a reminder of his parents, so he had to take good care of it. Thanking Sarasa, he decided to take good care of it. Sarasa pointed out that Keigo's shield had fallen into disrepair and handed him a new one. After assessing his equipment, he realized that the shield really didn't look reliable anymore, which wasn't surprising. After all, it had once been based on a simple barrel lid. Realizing the need for a replacement, Kigo decided to purchase a new shield from Sarasa, and also took the cloak he had ordered earlier. Keigo noticed how carefully Sarasa held Ash, and couldn't help but think about how comfortable he felt in her arms. At that moment, he caught himself thinking that he even envied his own wolf cub. However, as if sensing his master's mood, Ash immediately jumped out of Sarasa's arms and climbed up to Keigo. With a smile on his face, he hugged the puppy to himself, after which they went home. Keigo tried on the cloak again and still thought it looked impressive. He also noticed that there was a convenient pocket for a flask inside. Remembering that he still had some Murnam scale dust left, he wondered if it was possible to add an element to the armor. After conducting an experiment, he completed the enchantment and saw how the fabric began to glow softly. Using the skill Appraisal, he confirmed the result. Ash Wolf Cloak, Fire Resistance. Enchanted with the element of water, it now provided resistance to fire. By enchanting his armor with the element of water, Keigo gained resistance to fire. He knew that it was better to have an advantage than to have none at all. Thinking about it, he came to the conclusion that he should enchant the shield as well. This discovery opened up new possibilities for him. Looking at Ash, he firmly decided that he would definitely protect him. Many things had happened in the past few days, and with them, Keigo realized how weak he still was without his partner. While practicing his marksmanship, Keigo noted that training had become a daily routine for him. Suddenly, Ash began making noise, drawing his attention. Turning around, Keigo noticed a group of people dressed in who knows what clothes. Among all these people, Keigo immediately noticed Margot and Juno, who looked extremely annoyed. This made him wary. Turning his gaze to the man sitting on a horse and leading the group, Keigo immediately noticed that he was an aristocrat, surrounded by adventurers. However, the question remained, what could such a person want from him? Keigo, aware of his guilt, was still relieved that none of his loved ones were hurt. Bowing before the grave, he quietly said these words, then laid down a flower and, lowering his head, plunged into prayer. Some time ago. Keigo asked him again with distrust about accompanying him to the forest dungeon, immediately rejecting the idea. He reminded him that he was just an ordinary resident of a village near the city, and was not at all going to risk himself for this task. Wasn't an aristocrat with such a retinue of soldiers capable of dealing with several monsters? Margot, grinning, grabbed his face tightly, making it clear that he himself was not delighted with this idea, but despite this, he could not refuse. Keigo realized that it looked like he would have to provide the party with potions. From the conversation, he realized that the nobleman's name was Baerun. He wondered if the monsters in the dungeon were really stronger than usual, and wondered what use he could be on this expedition. He usually didn't venture too deep into the forest, but since he had to go there, he decided to take the opportunity to gather more herbs to study. However, something strange soon caught his attention. Everything seemed unnatural to him, like a performance from some kind of show. He couldn't help but wonder if this reminded him of a scene from a movie. The dog-like monsters used magic, injuring and killing several mercenaries. Everything that was happening seemed unreal. At the same time, the nobleman and his retinue remained in a safe place, only giving orders. It seemed as if they were not even going to interfere. No matter what happened to the mercenaries, they did not seem to care. The hero covered some of the mercenaries with his shield, saving them from the attack. At the same time, his thoughts returned to the feeling of fatigue from such inequality that haunted him in the previous world. He continued to think about it, realizing that he could not change anything, especially now, being in the midst of the battle. The hero activated the toughness skill, strengthening his shield and, heading towards the monsters, shouted loudly to the mercenaries, ordering them to run. Soon he noticed that the monsters began to move slower, and realizing that this was their chance for salvation, he shouted again that they needed to leave immediately. Turning around, he ran away, and the surviving mercenaries hurried after him. Having managed to defeat one of the monsters, Keigo felt his level increase. After assessing the fallen enemy, he realized what he was dealing with. A hellhound appeared in front of him, a large and agile creature capable of breathing fire. However, after using a fire attack, it became more vulnerable. Margot, watching what was happening, gloomily noted that going to such a place was pure suicide. At that moment, Keigo turned his attention to the aristocrat catching up with them. He was shouting something, clearly angry, to which the hero ironically noted that he had returned after all. Of course, the noble was angry at them for running away. To soften his anger, the best solution was to show his regret and give them some of the money he had earned. After that, he left, satisfied. Keigo realized that in this world, in addition to monsters, there were other, no less powerful enemies. The nobles. Standing before the graves of the fallen mercenaries, Keigo realized that even after such a harsh ordeal, the death of his comrades had affected only a few. Perhaps if his life depended on this nobleman, he would not mourn either. The thought of living in the city seemed increasingly tempting to him, an option he had considered before. However, no matter whether he was in the city or outside it, there was always the possibility of running into a monster calling himself an aristocrat. The fear for his life did not go away, no matter where he went. That was why he decided to give preference to peace of mind, rather than imaginary safety. From the very beginning, he did not want to communicate with people, and he was well aware that from the outside he looked like an eccentric. But now he did not care what others thought of him. Margot approached him, held out a small bag of gold coins, and, lowering his head, asked for forgiveness. Keigo simply gestured to Juno and Margot that an apology was unnecessary. He turned away and said a quick goodbye, not accepting the gold. All he wanted now was to be alone. He needed to get home, where Ash was waiting for him. As he walked back to his cart, he suddenly realized how tired he was. He took some of the herbs he had gathered earlier, thinking that they would help him regain his strength. However, after biting into a few leaves, he felt his body suddenly weaken, and then completely stop responding. As his body slowly sank to the ground, he was surprised to realize that he was completely paralyzed. This effect was completely unexpected for him. Keigo woke up. He found himself in an unfamiliar place, with Ash nestled comfortably on his chest. He let out a sharp cry of confusion, trying to figure out where he was, and immediately noticed Juno, Margot, and Sarasa nearby. Sarasa calmly explained that the herbs he ate were poisonous, which is why he lost consciousness. Realizing his mistake, Keigo immediately apologized to Juno and Margot, as they were already exhausted and they had to carry him after he collapsed. Keigo slept for about 6 hours, and during this time Juno, Margot, and Sarasa looked after Ash and Renante. He realized once again that he had caused problems for everyone around him. Thanking Sarasa for the tea she brought him in bed, Keigo noted with a warm smile that they were all incredibly kind people. Sarasa lived in Sachigo, was surprised to realize that he had been in an inn the entire time. He thanked his friends for their concern, but knew that he had to repay them somehow. As he climbed into his cart and headed home, he thought about how he would stay out of the forest from now on. However, after their last encounter, the monsters that lived there, including the hellhounds, were clearly angry. Keigo didn't know when he would be ready to confront them, but he knew that moment would inevitably come. Keigo picked up the herb he had consumed earlier and, deciding to investigate, used the appraisal skill. The result showed that it was a green anesthetic herb which had a strong anesthetic effect and no antidote. As he thought about the information he had received, he noted to himself that such a name fully justified its properties. Keigo sedated the prey with an anesthetic potion, but decided not to begin cutting it up until the poison was completely eliminated from his system. After tying the carcass to a tree branch, he noticed a goblin nearby. Figuring that he could use some extra practice in defense, he decided to take advantage of the opportunity. To attract the creature's attention, Keigo sat on the ground, activating the skill Stronghold before each strike, and then drank recovery potions. The goblin, in turn, gradually grew tired, becoming weaker. Eventually the goblin fled, and Keigo didn't pursue him. He never chased those who retreated. He tapped his shield in satisfaction, feeling himself getting stronger. remembering that the wolves hadn't attacked him lately. He wondered why. Looking at Ash, who was dozing sweetly on a tree stump, Keigo smiled and petted him, enjoying the moment of calm. After finishing the work, Keigo noted with satisfaction that he had finally finished the fire daggers. Besides that, he still had a few things left to sell. He also prepared a supply of dried venison. After patting Ash, he said with a smile, as if addressing him, as a token of gratitude for everything, he would take him with him to the city. Entering Margot, Keigo sold him the fire daggers and, having received payment, looked at him with slight bewilderment. Margot, in turn, silently stood up, approached the cart, and pointed at something among the things. Keigo, following his gesture, replied that it was intended for sale to Sarasa. Margot calmly replied that he was going to buy everything at once, and then perhaps sell it to Sarasa. Keigo wondered if this meant that Margot was going to buy his goods wholesale and then resell them. However, he didn't care and simply agreed to the deal. Pointing to the keg of booze he had brought with him, he noted that he had alcohol in stock as well. Hearing about the booze, Margot broke into a wide smile, clearly pleased with the unexpected addition to the deal. Keigo noted that Margot didn't seem like a very responsible person to be willing to close the store so easily. However, he couldn't say for sure. His attention soon turned to Juno, who came up and asked Margot something. It turned out that they were planning to invite Sarasa as well, so they could have a day off together. As the table was set and the group sipped their drinks, Sarasa suddenly brought out a chicken, signaling that it was time to make some chicken skewers with vegetables. Keigo set to work without further ado, carefully slicing the meat and vegetables before threading them onto skewers. Soon, the aroma of grilling skewers began to fill the air, making everyone hungry. He had been through a lot since he came to this world. Even though death was always close, he could still smile with confidence, just like the three sitting next to him. Confidence? Keigo thought about it, but when he saw Ash reaching for the food, he handed him a piece of dried venison. He felt safe now, and that was enough. Keigo looked up at the sky and noted how beautiful it was without the high-rise buildings, strewn with stars and illuminated by the bright moonlight. Keigo stretched, feeling an ache all over his body, and assumed it was from sleeping in the carriage the night before. However, a glance at Ash confirmed that he was fine. Smiling, he stroked his fluffy fur and warmly remarked on how cute he was. Then, thinking about getting some water for a bath before heading home, he approached Ash with the suggestion. Hearing a joyful bark in response, Keigo nodded and soon had enough water, noting with satisfaction that everything was ready. Having finished with the water, Keigo announced that everything was ready and suggested that Ash set off. However, before they could move, he heard a quiet growl. Looking in the same direction where his faithful companion was staring, he expected to see Murnum again. And indeed, standing on a large rock, Murnum was watching a huge snake, which in turn had already noticed him, but had not yet paid attention to Keigo and Ash. Keigo noted with alarm that Murnam looked like a baby compared to this giant monster. He dropped down to Ash and carefully covered his mouth, trying not to let him accidentally give away their presence. The awareness of the danger made him act quickly. He hurriedly began to pack, intending to return home as soon as possible. However, at that moment, a strange sound reached his ears, causing him to freeze in place. The monster, as if gathering something in its belly, made a strange sound, accumulating a caustic substance inside. A moment later, it spat out a stream of poisonous liquid directly at Murnum. The poison ate through his scales, causing him to let out a piercing squeal. Keigo quickly jumped into the cart and shouted the command to retreat. He abruptly steered his horse, forcing it to speed up, trying to leave the danger zone as quickly as possible. He only briefly noticed that he had lost the bath he had filled, but quickly dismissed the thought. Now was clearly not the time for that. Locked in the hut and buried in the hay, Keigo breathed heavily, trying to calm the fear that had gripped him. He felt his hands shaking and his heart pounding in his chest. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, and the same question was ringing in his head over and over again. What should he do now? Keigo thought that no matter what kind of monster stood in the way of the RPG hero, it would always find a way to defeat him. However, he himself was just an ordinary farmer, and he could not deal with such a monster on his own. In that case, there was only one option left: to seek help where all ordinary people go in such situations. Leaving the hut, he carefully looked around, making sure that the monster was not pursuing him. After that, he headed to the guild, where he took a board and chalk and began to draw. The rough sketch turned out to be a huge snake and Murnam standing in front of it. When he finished, he turned and asked if he knew what kind of creature it was. Keigo knew that if this creature really was a snake, he could only rely on others for help. He hoped that someone would be able to defeat the monster. Soon, an announcement came through about a job requesting to tame a snake, and the reward for doing so was 5 gold coins. He reminded himself that he shouldn't take on anything he couldn't handle alone. This was an important aspect of survival. After all, life was worth more than useless attempts. So he decided to focus on what he could do himself and not take unnecessary risks. A couple of days later, Keigo felt tired. Just digging a trench had already exhausted him. However, he consoled himself with the thought that even such a small step was better than doing nothing at all. At the same time, he was lucky. A group of experienced adventurers responded to his ad. Moreover, they not only agreed to take on the task, but also somehow found his missing bathtub. Keigo knew that turning to the Adventurers Guild was the right thing to do in situations like this. He didn't want cockatrices or hellhounds to attack his home from the forest. Having made this decision, he decided that from now on he would rely on adventurers to protect his home. Then, looking around, he remembered that he hadn't been to the water for a long time. Turning to Ash, he informed him that he was going to unload the bathtub. However, noticing something strange about the dog's behavior, he froze and asked warily what was wrong. As soon as Keigo asked his question, Ash suddenly rushed away, and Murnam emerged from the water. For a moment, his heart sank with anxiety, but when he saw who it was, he breathed a sigh of relief. Luckily, it was only Murnam. Keigo had no desire to get into a fight, but since this was the opponent in front of him, he decided that there was no particular reason to worry. Besides, he had the opportunity to test one of his ideas. Squinting, he pulled back the bowstring and fired an anesthetic arrow straight into Murnam's shoulder. As soon as the arrow hit the Murnam's shoulder, it began to lose strength and slowly collapse. Keigo did not hesitate. He approached and cut off the creature's head with one precise blow. After examining the prey, he noted that, despite its unusual shape, the internal structure of the Murnam resembled that of a fish. This thought made him wonder, perhaps they could be eaten? However, now was not the time to think about this. First of all, it was necessary to start skinning Murnama Hahiblayan. As expected, Murnams were in high demand as potion ingredients. Keigo took the opportunity to ask her to show him how to properly skin monsters, so he could avoid making mistakes in the future. He wondered if he could determine the ingredients' properties by tasting them, but realized that the anesthetic would only fully wear off after 6 hours. In addition, he received a new batch of Murnam scales, which reminded him of his blacksmithing. His enchanted daggers already had a fire effect, making them excellent survival tools. However, he wondered, what if he enchanted the dagger with a water effect? Keigo studied the new enchanted dagger with interest, activating his appraisal skill. The weapon emitted droplets of water from the tip of the blade. He frowned, thinking. At first glance, it looked like ordinary water. Then an idea occurred to him. If you stick the dagger into a flask, you can collect clean drinking water. This effect seemed quite useful in everyday life, even if it was not very impressive from a combat standpoint. Keigo wondered how long it would take to fill a regular barrel, considering the need to irrigate the fields and provide water for the livestock. He knew it would take a lot of water, but now he had a new source. Deciding that he would make more of these daggers, both for sale and for his own use, he mentally made a plan. After his bath, he noted how good the warm water felt, and eagerly awaited the time the tub would fill again. However, his rest was short-lived. It was time to get cooking. Myrna meat, Keigo decided to roast it just in case, although the taste was quite pleasant without it. Unfortunately, there was no white wine, but the fruit ale also went well with the dish. The meat tasted like white fish, only local from this world. Looking around the pond, he noticed the variety of animals and fish, a real treasure trove of new tasty ingredients. However, he stopped himself in time, reminding himself that these were the hunting grounds of those very snakes. If you want to survive, it is better to stay away from such places. Keigo sighed, realizing he was arguing with himself again. It didn't really matter, though. What was more important was earning some money so he could place another order with the Adventurers Guild if needed. He turned to Ash and offered to go with him to the city the next day to sell the new daggers. He was particularly interested in the water dagger, which emitted water, a handy tool for everyday use. Kigo planned to sell 2 of them to Sarasa and 2 more to Margot. However, as soon as he voiced this, Margot immediately shouted that he would take all 4. This led to a fight between him and Sarasa, each trying to convince Kigo to sell the daggers to him. Ash, barking loudly, managed to settle the dispute, and, apparently, this time, Margot won. One way or another, such squabbles between them for some reason even had a calming effect. At that moment, Kigo noticed Juno, standing to the side with a sad expression on his face. Something was clearly bothering him, and Kigo involuntarily wondered what the reason could be. Kigo petted Ash and promised to come back for him once he was done with his business. His thoughts involuntarily took him back to the past. When he worked at a trading company, he often encountered foreigners, but he could never really get close to them. The lack of knowledge of the language created a gap between them, making communication tense and uncomfortable. Now, even after finding himself in this world, he still did not dare to get closer to people. Besides, in this world, you can build connections, even without knowing many words. That's why Kigo didn't try to learn new expressions. When he spoke, he was understood anyway, even without precise wording. In the end, he was quite satisfied with the relationships he was able to build now. Kigo decided to evaluate the item Margot had given him. It turned out that the claws of a hellhound could be used in blacksmithing, and the powder from them was suitable for enchanting with fire resistance and fire charms. This discovery made him stay at home for a while. A few days later, he completed the work, creating a sword of hellfire and a fist shield forged from hellhound materials. The shield had a high level of fire resistance, making it reliable protection against fire attacks. Kigo enchanted his shield with fire resistance and reinforced it with metal, thinking he could now fight off the hellhound. Deciding to test his new sword, he swung it, unleashing a small firestorm. The force mercilessly destroyed the chair he was testing it on. As he watched the aftermath of the blow, he realized how destructive this force was. At that moment, Ash suddenly began barking loudly. Kigo became wary and noticed that his prey had fallen into the trap. If it hadn't been for his faithful companion, he might not have noticed. Kigo noticed that recently the animals were getting caught in traps with paralyzing poison more and more often. Deciding that the rabbit could be smoked later, he focused on preparing the venison and boar, deciding that they should be cooked immediately. Looking away, he noted with satisfaction that the bath was almost full. Today was definitely worth taking a warm bath and finally relaxing. Later, as he savored the cooked venison, he couldn't help but remark on how amazing it tasted. Kigo felt like he was truly living a carefree life now. He cut off some venison and handed it to Ash, watching him eat it with pleasure. In his old world, he often wondered if he could have become a farmer and lived such a quiet life. Now, it seemed like it was possible if it weren't for the threat of nobles and monsters. A life filled with simple pleasures in a cozy home seemed ideal. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he noticed Margot and Juno walking towards him. He wondered if they were out hunting, because the monsters were getting stronger lately. Kigo assumed that he would most likely not be taken anywhere this time. However, watching Margot and Juno, he realized that they were planning to go there anyway. Stopping Juno, he handed them some potions, knowing that in the current situation they would be more useful to his friends. Juno gratefully accepted the potions and nodded in acknowledgement. Kigo noticed that Margot had not gone with Juno and wondered why. However, before he could ask, Margot began to undress without a word and took over the bathroom. Kigo sighed, realizing that his plans to bathe with Ash had to be postponed. However, he decided not to pay much attention to it. Then his attention was drawn to the pile of various ingredients that Margot had brought with him. To his surprise, he said that he was giving them all away. Kigo was suspicious that perhaps Margot was simply trying to pay her off so that she could do whatever she wanted in his house. However, the ingredients were quite valuable, and after a short pause, Kigo thanked Margot. Margot simply nodded in response. Well, if that was the case, then he would take everything. It would only benefit him. Kigo told Margot that he was going to go pick herbs, and without further ado, he went with him. Unexpectedly, his presence somehow calmed his soul. While collecting herbs, Margot suddenly stopped and gestured somewhere to the side. Kigo followed his gaze and was surprised to notice a group of unfamiliar monsters. Margot, wasting no time, shouted that Kigo should shoot them with a bow. He responded with an okay, indicating that he understood the command. He had never encountered such creatures before, but Margot did not seem surprised. Perhaps he had encountered this type of monster before. After fighting the new monsters, Kigo felt his strength increase slightly. After assessing the fallen creatures, he found out that they were a cobalt warrior and a gray bear. Serious opponents, but they were manageable. Returning home, he was surprised to find that Margot had taken over the bathroom again. He was laughing loudly, clearly enjoying the rest. Kigo just shook his head, amazed at his ease, but did not object. Let him rest as much as he wanted. After a successful hunt, Kigo and Margot obtained valuable ingredients from the defeated monsters. Margot decided to butcher the carcasses in the city, and, thanking him for his help, Kigo sent his companion on his way back. He could not help but notice how easily he had interfered with his solitary life, disrupting the usual order of things. Despite his love of solitude, Kigo realized that he had made quite a few friends lately. This was contrary to his usual way of life, but, at the same time, did not cause any particular discomfort. When he worked in a trading company, he also had to communicate with many people, but now these connections felt different, warmer, and more real. Thinking about all this, his gaze accidentally stopped on the oil lamp. Kigo had often noticed that the town used oil lamps, the light of which was provided by demon cores obtained from defeated monsters. Looking at the bright glow of one of these lamps, he thought about how they had managed to obtain a similar core during their last raid. He thought that the light really looked beautiful, and he couldn't help but notice this to himself. Meanwhile, Ash was already sleeping soundly, curled up comfortably on his arm. Kigo gently adjusted the dog's fur, and, mentally wishing him good night, allowed himself to relax a little. Sitting down to work, Kigo began writing down his observations, compiling his own encyclopedia. He noted that if someone didn't have a similar reference book about this world, they could always create one themselves. Such a book could be quite useful, especially if he carried it with him into the city. Mentally thanking Margot for the materials and help she provided, he continued working. Slowly, his life in Lancaster was beginning to return to normal, but that didn't mean that the danger had disappeared. The threat still hung over him, reminding him that the peace might only be temporary. Kigo used the skill, Toughness, to soften Murnam's blow, allowing him to push the enemy back slightly. At the right moment, he used Hellfire Roar, but to his disappointment, it had no noticeable effect on the monster. Realizing that the blade's magic did not produce the desired result, he resorted to a simpler solution, a straight strike, which again only slightly pushed Murnam back. Kigo used his strike skill to dispatch the Murnam with one precise move. He found that fighting these creatures was becoming easier and easier. Thinking about the interactions between attributes, he realized that water element attacks could penetrate fireproof armor, while fire element attacks were useless against water element opponents. Although he tried to avoid unnecessary battles, understanding the attributes and magical laws of this world was vital. That was why he decided to conduct additional experiments on water element Murnams to better understand the mechanics of the elements. In addition, it allowed him to replenish his stock of valuable scales and meat. Today's catch was especially generous. After closing the cart, Kigo suddenly heard a strange noise. He looked around and saw the serpent moving inexorably towards him. Realizing the danger, he immediately climbed into the cart and, without wasting a second, gave the command to his horse to gallop away. Throughout the entire trip, Ash barked at the snake non-stop, clearly trying to scare it away. Kigo noted that it would be better for the dog not to provoke the dangerous creature, and called it closer to him, hoping to avoid unnecessary threats. Once he got home, he quickly took refuge in the hut, locking the door. Hidden in the hut, Kigo silently repeated to himself that he had made a mistake. It seemed that his recent victories over the Murnams had made him too relaxed, and he had completely forgotten about the far more dangerous threat, the serpent, walking nearby. He prayed that the monster would not find his hiding place. if only it would not appear at his home. These disturbing thoughts, mixed with uncontrollable fear, did not allow him to sleep all night. When Keigo returned to the Adventurers Guild, he updated his order, increasing the reward for taming the serpent. As he was making the changes, the thought flashed through his mind that it would be a good idea to strengthen the defenses of the area and set up more traps around the house. He had already sent out a request to destroy the beast, but he felt that it might not be enough. What else could he do to protect himself? Keigo boiled the Gebel venom together with the poison glands of the cockatrice, which Margot gave him. However, when the moment came to test the resulting brew, he felt doubts. It was scary to try it, but without testing, it was impossible to know how it works. Hoping that the antidote would work, he still took a sip. Almost immediately, without waiting for the consequences, he took the antidote he had prepared in advance. However, it did not help completely. His strength left him, and he collapsed on the floor, losing the ability to stand on his feet. Ash, noticing that his master was in trouble, barked uncontrollably, trying to bring him to his senses. After drinking another dose of the antidote and overcoming his weakness, Keigo finally came to his senses. After conducting an assessment, he found out that he had received the poison Donur, which is highly toxic. The knowledge that even a drop of this substance could kill him made him hold his breath. Keigo hugged Ash, who had been pacing restlessly all this time, and tried to calm him down. Stroking his faithful companion's fur, he quietly apologized for making him worry. Keigo hoped that this poison would actually repel the snake. There was a pleading tone in his voice. Let it work. Although his preparations were far from perfect, he had done his best. He had set traps, created medicines, and thought of possible countermeasures. He ran a hand over his forehead, trying to collect his thoughts, but his head was still spinning from testing the poison. He could only hope that the snake would not appear at his home. After a sleepless night of fear, Keigo felt completely exhausted. His body didn't obey him, but despite this, he forced himself to get up. Morning had come, which meant it was time to take care of Ash. Turning to the dog, he was about to feed him, but he suddenly began to bark loudly. Keigo's heart sank. Something was wrong. Grabbing his weapon, he tensed, trying to listen to the sounds around him. Fear constrained his movements, but he knew that he needed to check what was going on. Keigo froze when he saw the snake, realizing that there was almost no chance of salvation. His heart began to pound wildly, and his legs seemed to have grown to the ground. The thought of running away flashed through his mind, but he understood that it might be useless. He had already said goodbye to life, preparing to rush away, when suddenly, a group of adventurers appeared in front of Keigo and Ash, standing between them and the serpent. Without wasting any time, the fighters began their attack, releasing spells and slashing at the monster with their weapons. The blows shook the ground, magic sparkled in the air, and the serpent, hissing, lunged at the attackers. Keigo, frozen in shock, could not tear his eyes away from the battle that was unfolding. He knew that this was his only chance for salvation, but his body did not obey. Fear paralyzed every movement. Ash, pressing his ears, growled quietly, but did not leave his master. Keigo dropped to one knee in confusion, holding Ash tightly to him. His mind raced to comprehend what was happening, but the chaos of the battle, the flashes of magic, and the dull thuds of weapons hitting the snake's scaly plates only served to further confuse him. The only thing that was clear was that he didn't belong here. He would be of no use, so it was best to leave the hard work to the adventurers. However, at that moment, the snake began to prepare to attack. Its body tensed, and an ominous steam erupted from its mouth. It was about to release a poisonous spit that could dissolve any living thing. The man fighting in close combat managed to put up a shield in time, taking some of the snake's poisonous attack. The steam of the poisonous spit enveloped his barrier, but it seemed that the defense withstood the blow. Without wasting time, he turned to the two female mages who had arrived with him and loudly called for their support. The mages immediately responded, starting to weave spells, and the snake, as if anticipating the threat, tensed his giant body again, preparing for the next maneuver. The mages, concentrating all their power, simultaneously released a spell resembling a fire tornado. Flames rose into the sky, enveloping the giant body of the serpent. and in a matter of moments, its flesh began to char and then crumble into dust. The heat was so unbearable that even Keigo, who was on the side, instinctively covered his face with his hand. When the flames died down, there was no trace of the serpent left. Only charred fragments of the earth testifying to the former threat. The adventurers, having assessed their victory, noted that they had worked in a coordinated manner and had done an excellent job. Keigo, still recovering from the experience, expressed his gratitude to them, realizing that his decision to contact the guild had been the right one. As he watched his saviors leave, he thought about how impressive their teamwork had been. These people had challenged the dangerous creature without hesitation and defeated it with their coordinated efforts. Keigo realized that he had just witnessed a perfect example of cooperation and strength that he himself did not yet possess. After sleepless nights, Keigo finally managed to fall asleep. When he woke up and went outside, he was convinced that everything that had happened was real and not a bad dream. Chaos reigned around him. Traces of the battle with the snake were everywhere, and all his prepared means of self-defense were useless against such a formidable opponent. The realization of how close he was to death made him hold his breath. And yet, despite the fear and horrors he had experienced, he was alive. Him and Ash. That was the main thing. As Keigo surveyed the destruction, thinking about what had happened, someone's voice suddenly called out to him. Margot and Juno had arrived from the city, apparently having heard from the guild about the snake's appearance. They looked worried and seemed to have rushed here out of concern for Keigo. He tried to remain calm and calmly assured them that he was fine, thanking them for their concern. However, before he could finish speaking, both friends rushed towards him, hugging him and genuinely happy that he was unharmed. There was genuine relief in their gestures, and Keigo froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. But then he exhaled and allowed himself to relax, realizing how good it was to know that someone actually cared. Margot took the bath and relaxed, enjoying the warmth of the water. Keigo, meanwhile, poured a drink for Juno, who accepted it gratefully. Although they had disturbed his peaceful time, he found himself thinking that maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. After all, there was something cozy and familiar about their presence. Keigo sat down next to him, looked up at the sky, and lost himself in contemplating the stars that spread out above him like an endless shining canvas. Ash was named by his owner. This ash wolf cub, located on the second level, had an extremely slow growth rate, which was due to the rarity of his species. He spent all his time next to his owner, following him relentlessly. Even in his sleep, Ash preferred to be close, believing that the most comfortable and safe place to rest is at the feet of his master. Ash loved meat the most, especially the one his master gave him. It was incredibly tasty. Besides him, the master had a horse named Rosianta and a stupid chicken. But he couldn't eat the chicken. Rosianta preferred fresh grass, and the stupid chicken loved worms. One day, Ash tried to help her by bringing her earthworms, but the master sternly said that he shouldn't do that. If it wasn't allowed, then it wasn't allowed. After all, Ash was an obedient boy. Ash always accompanied his master in his affairs, and every day brought something new. Where will they go today? One day a terrible monster attacked the master, and then Ash, without thinking, barked, trying to scare off the enemy. His voice was menacing enough to scare the enemy. After that, the master stroked him, and Ash felt like the happiest wolf cub in the world. One day, an older man and a young woman got into an argument over Keigo's attention. Ash couldn't stand it any longer and barked loudly, trying to stop their squabble. However, instead of stopping, the girl suddenly grabbed the wolf cub and hugged him tightly. He almost suffocated in her arms, whining pitifully, as if begging for mercy. Keigo watched this scene with some strange expression on his face, but Ash couldn't understand what exactly this look meant. Ash especially loved to sing. One day, he and his owner were sitting in the bathtub, singing something like "Ta-da-dan," enjoying the moment. The wolf cub felt incredibly happy when he could sing along with Keigo. In addition, he was good at running and loved to chase whatever was thrown to him. He especially liked it when his owner threw a bone. At such moments, Ash felt like it was the best game in the world. When Ash brought the bone back, the owner always petted him, and it was incredibly nice. But despite all his kindness, Keigo was sometimes so stupid. The wolf noticed that there was no water left in his bowl. He went to his owner and tried to wake him up, but he did not react. Ash growled, then yelped, and then even started jumping up and down next to the bed. "Come on, it's time to get up! How can he sleep when he has no water?" Very stupid owner. The heat in the room was stifling, so intense that Ash could barely stand. He knew it was dangerous, he told him so. But now was not the time to collapse. He had to protect his master until he woke up. Ash could always sense danger approaching. Something big and long was hiding in the darkness. "Come on, come out!" The wolf growled warily, not taking his eyes off the shadow moving in the corner. He always warned his master of impending danger, no matter how scary it was. This time would be no exception. He would protect Kago. He would protect Rosianta. The creature made a sharp move towards him, but Ash did not back down. Who thought they could scare him with just a threatening look? Fools! Ash was not so easy to stop. But despite everything, the owner was the kindest person in the world. Ash knew that he always wanted to stay by his side, no matter where he went. He was Ash, the Ash Wolf, his owner's loyal partner and protector. That day, Okuda was accompanied and protected by two men, Margot and Juno, who had fighting skills. They were with Ash, a faithful dog, gathering medicinal herbs deep in the forest. If Okuda had been alone in the forest, he would not have dared to go so far. He felt a great relief that he was not alone, and that there were comrades he could trust nearby. Margot reported that their target was in this location, and they should continue moving. Soon after, they entered the battle, and were able to successfully destroy the monster, without suffering any serious losses. He noted that the battle was not as difficult as he expected, and that victory came easily to them. Margot, one of the fighters, noticed an enemy appearing behind him, and alerted the others. Before he could dodge, Okuda was hit by a surprise attack that caught him off guard. Almost immediately after, new giant monsters, larger than the previous one, burst onto the battlefield. Seeing a particularly dangerous creature among them, he expressed extreme surprise that a cockatrice was in the area. Inwardly, he noted that the group had changed its formation to better deal with the threat. This time, he would be in the forward position with a shield and hold off the enemy. When he noticed the cockatrice's eyes began to glow, he realized it was about to use its petrification ability. He activated his defensive ability, called Fortress, to withstand the incoming attack. Okuda noticed that his arm was starting to go numb. In his mind, he reminded himself to stay calm and take the potion, as he had done in similar situations. Margot reacted in time and handed him the potion, which helped restore the condition. He accepted it and expressed his gratitude for the timely help. Ash, who was nearby, barked as if to encourage morale and confidence. He praised the dog and gave the signal to begin the counterattack. Margot and Juno, acting in unison, supported him in the attack. They dealt a powerful combined blow to the enemy, demonstrating excellent teamwork. After the battle, the system notified that the character's level had increased from 12th to 13th. The changes affected the characteristics as well. Health increased from 26 to 28, magical energy from 16 to 27, vitality increased from 19 to 21, strength from 25 to 27, intelligence from 76 to 77, agility from 31 to 33, speed from 25 to 27. Okuda felt that he was stronger than he was before, and realized that he had made significant progress. However, he also realized that the most important thing is not only strength, but also reliable comrades who are nearby. The group completed the mission and returned safely to the city without losing a single member. Sarasa, a woman in their entourage, was the first to approach Okuda. He remembered that the last time he saw her was before the tragic attack of the snake on his home. He noted that, despite everything he had been through, he was fine. Inside, he felt a certain satisfaction that was difficult to express in words. The idea of living his life in the routine of ordinary days seemed quite appealing to him. However, since arriving in this world, every day was different from the previous one and brought new challenges. In the past, he worked for a company and was completely absorbed in work activities. After parting with his colleagues, he felt an uneasy silence and a vacuum of loneliness. He thought that his former comrades were probably having fun and living life to the fullest. Despite his selfish thoughts, he admitted to himself that he liked a quiet and measured life. His deepest desire was to be truly free. Many believed that even experienced adventurers could not always defeat such an enemy as a snake. He admitted that if a dragon attacked him, it would probably lead to his death. For this reason, he was determined to become stronger and survive no matter the circumstances. Having magic seemed like a great way to increase his chances of survival. He joked that he had already had powerful magic all along, although in fact, this was not true. Life, in his opinion, was not easy and did not forgive mistakes. Only recently did he realize that he had exceptional abilities in alchemy and blacksmithing. No other person could create potions and weapons as effective as he did. Even Margot, who had a lot of experience in crafts, could not recreate his products. Although he did not have fire magic, he could achieve the same effect with a fire sword. And although he could not heal with magic, he created potions that restored health and eliminated negative conditions. This result was possible thanks to his special appraisal skill. He admitted to himself that he had greatly underestimated the importance of this skill before. When he decided to focus on alchemy and blacksmithing, he realized that this could be his path to success. No matter what path he chose, it would all come down to hard work and persistence. Thinking about this, he gradually fell asleep. When he woke up, he remembered that he had another weapon, a bow. Later, he went to practice to hone his bow skills. During the lesson, he thanked his mentor, Master Kai, for his support and training. Kai, in response to this, gave the command to pierce and demonstrated a shot from a bow. Okuda concluded that the skill increased the penetrating power of arrows, amplifying their impact. He came to the conclusion that such an ability would be especially useful against monsters that were immune to magic. Despite the power he had achieved, he knew that there were still hidden and dangerous creatures in this world. If he let his guard down, he might very well pay with his life. Kai turned to Okuda, indicating that it was now his turn to shoot. Okuda calmly acknowledged that it was his turn and concentrated. He took a stable position, preparing to shoot, mentally braced himself, and gave himself the mental command to pierce the target. His thoughts at that moment revolved around a strategic choice. Instead of risking his life in close combat with a sword, it was much wiser and safer to develop archery skills that allowed him to keep his distance. Mastering magic from scratch would be much longer and more difficult, which meant that archery was a more promising path to survival. He came to the conclusion that right now, training with a bow was the most important thing to devote maximum effort to. Suddenly, the system confirmed his success. Kigo Okuda had mastered a new combat skill called piercing shot. Despite this, he knew full well that it was nearly impossible to hit the target on the first try, so he calmly accepted the result. He expressed his gratitude for the experience and prepared to leave. He then approached Dan to state his desire to send a formal request for subordination. It flashed through his mind that such requests were quite common. He usually does this when he notices particularly strong monsters near his home. Looking at his old bow, he noticed how worn it was and how much it had lost its former strength. He went to the gun shop. Okuda felt a sense of relief at the realization that he was able to obtain a new bow. However, he then noticed Margot walking towards him with a smile on her face and tried to figure out what exactly he was trying to express. Okuda felt uneasy and mentally asked Margot not to take any rash actions. He thought that it was not a good idea to close the store in broad daylight, since drinking alcohol every day was not a wise decision. He asked him, in a reserved but insistent tone, to abandon the idea. He noted to himself that Margot was distinguished by a rare carelessness, unlike most of the people around her. Soon he finished the complicated process of making a special substance, petrifying sand, waiting for the cockatrice's eye to dry completely. He sighed with relief, noting that he had finally finished this painstaking work. The system reported that a new weapon had been created, a petrifying arrow. This arrow had a special attribute that allowed the target it hit to turn into stone. Okuda remembered that he already knew how to create poison and paralysis arrows, but came to the conclusion that it was necessary to store them separately from the hunting arrows to avoid accidental use. At that moment, Ash, his dog, barked loudly, attracting his attention. Okuda became alert, trying to figure out what was causing the disturbance. He immediately froze when he noticed the approaching nobles and felt a tension building inside him. Beirun came over and, leaving no choice, announced that Okuda had to go with them. Okuda's thoughts began to race, trying to figure out if they were really demanding that he go with them. He bowed politely and expressed regret, showing his willingness to respect subordination. However, he noticed that they were still not satisfied. Then he silently handed them a coin to complete the interaction. After that, the nobles left without saying a word. Okuda took a deep breath and noted to himself that the situation had been dangerous, but he had managed to get out of it without any consequences. He was also relieved that this time neither Margot nor Juno were around. He didn't want them to see such a conflict. He looked back at the retreating adventurers and felt sorry for them, as they looked exhausted and joyless. He wished them safe return, but quickly pushed the sympathy away, reminding himself that they had nothing to do with him. He was pleased to note that he had managed to replenish his supplies. However, he still had to evaluate the herbs he had gathered in the forest. Although he had no particular desire to test for poisonous plants, he knew he had to do it. At this point, his attention was again distracted by the noise coming from outside. He looked out and noticed that the nobles had appeared at his home again. Okuda didn't yet fully understand what exactly was happening, but his gaze froze when he saw the consequences. The petrification had spread over a large area. He panicked and began searching for the Puruna potion, and luckily found it quickly. After assessing the situation, he came to the conclusion that the people had suffered as a result of a cockatrice attack. Okuda saw many wounded, but to his relief, none of them were killed. He realized that the adventurers had failed again and were unable to reach the dungeon. He stood among the wounded and barely contained his irritation. He did not want to say it out loud in front of the injured, but he was outraged that they had once again made a mess of his area. The thought was floating through his mind that his barn was not meant to serve as a field hospital. He clearly realized that the real culprit of what was happening was the nobleman, who should be held accountable. Okuda promised himself that next time he would definitely collect compensation from him. His irritation grew, and in his thoughts he called the nobleman stupid. However, he did not leave the victims without help. He offered refreshments, and the grateful adventurers expressed their gratitude. The nobleman continued to urge them on, showing impatience. Inwardly, Okuda prayed that they would never return. When all the commotion finally ended, he wondered what could have happened to the nobleman's horse. Then he breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that he was finally alone and could go about his business in peace. Byron was the name of a nobleman, descended from a noble and respected family, which had lived for many generations in the city called Leicester. The lineage of this family had a long, rich, and glorious history, known to almost every inhabitant. There was not a person left on the streets of Leicester who had not heard of the famous name of Byron. So deeply rooted was it in the public consciousness. The situation in the city had become alarming lately, as attacks from monsters had become more frequent. He explained the increase in their activity by the fact that the dungeon located in the nearby forest was overflowing with dangerous creatures. It was this circumstance, in his opinion, that caused the number of monsters in the city's vicinity to increase sharply. Realizing that his background obliged him to act, Beirun felt the weight of responsibility. He firmly believed that a nobleman's duty was to protect his hometown, maintain order, and demonstrate personal courage. To this end, he personally gathered a group of adventurers to go into the forest dungeon and clear it of threats. However, to his great disappointment, the expedition did not bring the expected results and actually failed before it even began. The companions were completely unprepared for battle and showed complete helplessness. As soon as they encountered an ordinary cockatrice, not the strongest but still a dangerous monster, these so-called adventurers scattered in panic in all directions. The horse Melty, who was especially dear to him and his faithful companion, was fortunately returned to him in perfect condition. This was done to avoid the risk of her being harmed or killed during the encounters with the monsters. After the unsuccessful campaign, Beirun returned to his chambers and felt a deep sadness that suddenly and completely overwhelmed him. For 3 days and 3 nights, his pillow did not dry from tears, testifying to his mental pain. In his thoughts, he turned to his favorite, asking her to wait for him. He promised himself that he would definitely return her to her former appearance, no matter what the path to this was, and no matter how many gold coins it took. Beirun firmly believed that his subordinates had a duty to work tirelessly, striving to increase the honor of their master. He considered neglect of this sacred duty an offense deserving severe punishment. The men he had chosen as his companions had not only failed him, but had also dishonored his good name and then tried to justify themselves. Therefore, he did not hesitate to order their detention for a period of 1 week, considering this as fulfilling part of the duties dictated by his noble birth. Byron also believed that it was the nobleman's responsibility to personally administer justice to those who had failed him, and warned that one should think carefully before upsetting him. Outside the city, there lived a strange man who led a reclusive life and was very different from the others. This man, as Byron noted, was well aware of his place in society. Moreover, when he saw that Byron had been petrified, he immediately rushed to his aid and managed to heal him. Unlike all the others, this man was not just reliable, but truly useful. In addition, the meat dish that the man called kunsei turned out to be the most delicious dish that Byron had ever tasted. He was so impressed that he firmly decided that next time he would definitely make this man his loyal subordinate and go with him to the dungeon. He was going to do all this for the sake of his honor, because he perceived himself as a hero of this land, whose name should spread everywhere. In his mind, he anticipated the battle with the monsters, declaring that he was going after them. His loud laughter, filled with determination and inner fire, sounded in the air, and from his lips flew the name, full of passion, Melty. One of the guild workers was named Dan, and he had been extremely busy in recent days. More and more dangerous creatures began to appear around the city: cockatrice, snakes, and other monsters that posed a serious threat to security. Dan believed that this situation was directly related to the fact that the dungeon located nearby was overcrowded. He was convinced that unless decisive measures were taken, the consequences would be devastating for both the city's residents and the surrounding areas. The first warning signs had already appeared. The economy had begun to weaken and decline noticeably. In response to the growing threat, the guild began actively supporting adventurers called upon to exterminate monsters and protect civilians. These brave people risked their own lives every day to save the lives of others. However, Dan was soberly aware that no one would engage in such heroism for free. He understood that only a fool would agree to such risks without appropriate payment. Despite his desire to reward brave people adequately, his options were limited. Both the guild's funds and the money coming from customers were too modest. He emphasized that another important element in the whole problem was a local nobleman in a position of power. This man turned out to be Byron, and in Dan's opinion, he was excessively stingy. Even in times of extreme danger, when the city's defenders should have been supported, Byron continued to cut the guild's budget. Dan was sure that if the rewards for completing quests were higher, it would attract stronger adventurers willing to engage in battle with monsters. Victory over the monsters would lead to the restoration of normal economic activity. This, in turn, would allow the tax system to be established. But, as Dan noted, the nobleman Byron was unable to comprehend even such elementary things, and his behavior seemed blatantly absurd. He became a source of constant headache for everyone around him. In an attempt to find a way out of the situation, Dan turned to the guildmaster for advice. However, the amount they could offer adventurers as a reward was negligible and did not correspond to the scale of the threats. Against this backdrop, a mysterious man named Keigo appeared, Okuda. Despite being an adventurer himself, he acted completely differently. He created orders on his own and offered astonishingly large sums for them. Although his tasks concerned very strong and dangerous monsters, the rewards he offered completely compensated for the risk. Dan felt sincere gratitude to this man. It seemed to him that Keigo was closely related to Margot, Juno, and Sarasa, as he often saw them together. In addition to being an adventurer, Dan believed that Keigo also made money by selling various items, although this was only a guess. He did not attach much importance to the source of his income, considering only one thing important. Keigo regularly and generously paid the guild for placing orders. Dan came to the conclusion that he should closely monitor the actions of this unusual man and value his support. After the incident with that arrogant nobleman, Okuda reunited with his comrades, with whom he had shared many trials and moments. After they were convinced that he was completely fine and no troubles had touched him, they all decided that it was worth celebrating this event to relieve tension and feel the taste of life again. He was especially surprised by the behavior of Sarasa, who, as it turned out, was not at all against drinking, and did so quite confidently, demonstrating not only the ability to endure, but also to enjoy the process. Amidst the merriment and laughter, his comrades asked him to tell them what had happened between him and that nobleman, and how everything had been resolved. Okuda, trying to explain himself as best he could, told them how he had given him the money and, as far as possible, asked them not to bother him anymore, not to interfere in his life, and to leave him alone. He explained himself using a heavily distorted local language, since he did not speak it perfectly, and also resorted to abundant gesticulation, hoping that facial expressions and gestures would help convey the meaning of what he said. However, he himself was not sure how fully and accurately those around him understood him. However, he noted with confidence that they liked the story, because from their faces, laughter, and reactions, it was clear that the story evoked a lively response. This night, usually filled with peace and quiet, unexpectedly for him turned out to be noisy, cheerful, and eventful, which, as he realized, was not something bad for him and even seemed refreshing. Realizing that nothing could be changed and the day was over, Okuda wished everyone good night, internally reconciled with the past. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun began to penetrate through the window, he, with slight embarrassment, offered his comrades water and warned them to be careful, remembering yesterday's libations. After everyone left, he noted that he had drunk quite a lot, but despite this, he felt surprisingly cheerful. It occurred to him that his body had previously been less able to cope with alcohol, and now, perhaps due to experience using the appraisal skill and frequent experiments with various poisons, he had increased his resistance to negative influences. Suddenly, he remembered the grass he had recently found in the forest, and realized that he had not yet assessed it. Judging by its appearance and past experience, he did not expect anything good from it, and anticipated some unpleasant effect. But despite this, he decided to conduct a small experiment. He licked the leaf carefully and was surprised to find that he felt no numbness, pain, or other strange sensations. The taste was refreshing and reminded him of mint, which was quite unexpected. Anxiety stirred inside him, and for a moment he wondered if he was going crazy, but then he calmed down with an effort of will and used the skill of evaluation. The system worked as clearly and reliably as always, reporting that the element found was marble grass, an edible plant ideal for drying and then brewing tea. This discovery pleased him. He realized that he had found not poison, but a valuable, natural ingredient. Deciding that next time he would definitely treat Sarasu to the aromatic drink, he noted that now he needed to dry the leaves correctly. At that moment, he heard the sound of rain. It was the first rain he had seen since he came to this world. Not wanting to waste time, he headed to the forge, intending to continue working until the rain subsided. Later, the system gave the result again. A new weapon called Hellfire Arrow with a medium-strength flame was created. Seeing this, Okuda was sincerely pleased because he managed to successfully complete the creation of an elemental weapon. He was glad that he had previously imbued his quiver with the water element. This gave him an interesting idea. If he was able to introduce an element into the quiver, then using the appraisal skill, he could learn to enchant items. And so he did. The system reported that the element water plate had been created, an iron plate soaked in the element water, on the surface of which moisture formed. He realized that now he could enchant not only weapons, but also armor and household items. To increase the size of the plate, he needed scales, which he would get later. Judging by the results, the plate collected water more efficiently than the water blades, and this discovery inspired him. He began to think about how he could apply the ability in everyday life. For example, create a mug that would produce water on its own, a frying pan that would emit fire, a broom that could attract dust, or even a rope that could petrify. All of these ideas could be useful and in demand, because no one had ever done anything like this before. But despite his potential, he reminded himself of his true purpose, to live in solitude and peace, away from the bustle of people. If he showed himself too much, he might again fall into the sight of that same nobleman, and he did not want that at all. So he went back to work. He soon noticed that Ash, his dog, was covered in mud. Apparently, the dog liked the rain, which made Okuda smile a little. The dog barked happily, reacting to his words. He took a breath of fresh air and felt a surge of energy. After a few days, the rain finally stopped. The pleasant aroma of damp earth hung in the air. The bright blue sky with slowly floating clouds and the soft warmth of the sun created a feeling of peace. He had already managed to feed all the animals and water the garden, and now, In the peace and quiet, he began to feel sleepy. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to an approaching carriage. This caused him to feel an internal tension. He felt that the situation was not developing in his favor. Okuda hoped inwardly that it was just a coincidence. However, soon Margot's voice was heard calling him, and the name Byron. The name Byron stirred memories in him, though he couldn't remember exactly where he had heard it. He pulled out his writing board to try and start a dialogue. It turned out that the guildmaster had chosen a detachment consisting of Margot, Juno, Kai, and himself to accompany that very nobleman. This news did not please him. He began to wonder why the nobleman was so eager to conquer the dungeon. Perhaps the overcrowding of the dungeons was causing monsters to appear on the surface, and a cleansing was indeed necessary. It was also beneficial to Okuda himself, as it would make his home safer. However, he did not trust Byron, whom he considered a man who had neither experience nor understanding of the necessary forces, but who tried to command and impose his decisions. In simple words, he considered him incompetent. He wanted to avoid participating in the expedition with all his might, but perhaps with the support of the city's strongest warriors, it would not be so dangerous. He wanted the dungeon clearing to be successful. He decided to start preparing because this day had finally arrived. Looking at the guildmaster, he noticed that he looked confident and calm. Guildmaster Shiraku addressed the group of adventurers with gratitude for their participation in the recent operation. Okuda, realizing that he did not have the same fighting power as the others, decided to join the support squad, which consisted of healers and those who provided rear support. At that moment, Sarasa approached him. She silently handed him a bracelet, which surprised him. Realizing that it was not just a decoration, he activated the appraisal skill. The system immediately returned the result, a bracelet with poison resistance, which gave the owner the ability to resist poisoning. This amazed Okuda. Such things were expensive. He sincerely thanked Sarasu, promising to take care of her gift. Then he noticed Kai's strange gaze. It wasn't a hostile gaze, but there was tension and some determination in it. Okuda thought that the time had come. He tried to calm himself with the thought that there were many strong people in their group, and if they kept their cool, even such a dangerous opponent as a snake could be defeated. However, they did not encounter a single monster on the way, which caused alarm. It meant that all the creatures had gathered directly in the dungeon. When they reached the entrance, Byron gave the order to begin the attack. The adventurers rushed into battle. Okuda watched with admiration as his comrades worked together in unison. The guildmaster, Kai, and the other warriors all acted with honed strength. He, being in support, distributed potions to the victims. At some point, he realized that the role of a healer was no less important, and if everything continued like this, he himself would become a full-fledged healer. But soon his potions and herbs ran out. The monsters were still surrounding them, and the fighter's strength was running out. He looked with alarm at the argument between the squad members and Byron, mentally begging for it to stop and give the order to retreat. Fortunately, he still decided to retreat. The capture of the dungeon failed again, despite the participation of the city's strongest fighters. This meant only one thing. Next time, they would have to face even more powerful enemies. Okuda realized that he needed to become stronger. When he returned home, he saw that Sarasa had set the table. Apparently, she had prepared everything in advance, putting her soul into the food. He thanked her, genuinely touched by her concern. Okuda reflected that despite the language barrier, they were beginning to understand each other better through actions and gestures. Later the potion was ready, but he felt tired and allowed himself to rest. The night passed quietly, and in the morning he was surprised to realize that he had not felt so relaxed among people for a long time. It was an unusual but pleasant change. Soon he heard a knock on the door. It was Shiraku. The guildmaster handed him the bags. They were heavy and, as it turned out, filled with gold coins. There was also a letter inside. Okuda used his appraisal skill to understand its contents. It was a message of thanks and compensation for the unused potions. He was surprised beyond measure, but he understood the gist of it. His efforts were acknowledged. Shiraku then mentioned Margot and Juno, and Okuda guessed that he should hand the heavy bags over to them. He noted to himself that Shiraku looked tired and aged, perhaps due to his interactions with the nobleman in question. Turning to his sleeping comrades, he called them to breakfast, deciding that a cup of tea would be a worthy start to the day. Everyone thanked him for the treat. Shiraku, having finished his tea, said goodbye to them. Okuda thought that he must be very busy since he was going on his way right away. He said goodbye to him, thanking him for his visit. Hope was growing inside him. Perhaps the important truth would finally reach that very nobleman. Even such a strong team could not cope with the dungeon. Perhaps there would be peace in the area for a while. They hadn't even had time to rest properly. Okuda wondered if they should throw a consolation party to restore the spirit and cohesion of the group. Okuda felt a sense of joy as he watched his guests, Juno and Margot, eat the beef shashlik he had prepared with obvious pleasure. It seemed to him that both of them were beginning to tire a little, and he considered this a fortunate development, since it could mean that the evening was coming to a logical conclusion. At this point, he had already finished preparing the soup, hoping that it would help everyone regain their strength after a busy day. He noted to himself that the herb was indeed effective against a hangover, and noticeably eased his general condition. Margot, looking at the pot of soup, recognized the dish, and noted that it seemed to be shimino soup. Okuda confirmed his guess without a shadow of a doubt, confidently and briefly letting him know that he was right. It flashed through his mind, as on previous occasions, everyone ate with great appetite, not hiding their pleasure. At the end of the evening, he wished everyone good night, and noted that they would definitely see each other tomorrow. The next morning, his first thought was relief that the soup had actually worked and helped everyone come to their senses. Since he had business at the guild, he suggested going to town, and they went there together. On the way, Okuda thought about his own desires and admitted to himself that he really wanted to master magic. He recalled an incident from the past, when a sorceress used a tornado spell to defeat a giant serpent. He clearly realized that it was wind magic, the element that had always attracted him. He came to the conclusion that mastering magic required painstaking practice and persistent training. He compared it to any other skill. Once you have mastered the basics, you can gradually develop mastery over time, albeit slowly but surely. As they parted, Margot expressed his desire to meet again, bidding him farewell. Okuda bid farewell in return, doing so lightly and with a slight smile. Upon entering the guild building, he immediately made a request, specifying that he wanted to study wind magic. Dan, who was standing at the entrance, agreed and nodded, confirming the possibility. Okuda was surprised to see a dojo open before him, a place he didn't associate with teaching magic. He thought that Master Kai was unlikely to have magical abilities, despite the atmosphere inside. Dan knocked on the door, addressing a man named Han, asking him to take over the teaching. Okuda felt a little nervous when he heard the name of the teacher. He was surprised when he saw that Han, a noble-looking man with an artificial eye, was the one who would be teaching him. Han turned out to be an instructor who specialized in magic related to darkness. Despite this, Okuda expressed his desire to learn from him with complete seriousness and respect. He wondered how many battles and hardships this man must have endured. Han demonstrated the power of wind magic to him, and Okuda felt admiration. It was truly impressive. Although he himself had no experience yet, he felt that he wanted to follow this path. He decided to start with something simple, imagining the desired image in his head, visualizing the air gathering into a spiral, turning into a typhoon. Concentrating, he repeated the words of the spell to himself, directing the magical power to the image of the wind. After much effort and hours of practice, he managed to activate the magic. The result, however, was weak, clearly not enough to be considered significant. Nevertheless, the system notified him of the successful mastery of magic and the discovery of a new skill called wind. Okuda made a firm decision to continue training and become stronger. He also reminded himself that one day he would be able to brew his own potions to help maintain his strength. He promised himself to give his training his all. During one of his training sessions, he playfully turned to his loyal dog Ash, noticing that he seemed to be enjoying the airflow created by the spell. Suddenly, he noticed that someone had fallen into the trap. It was a blue wolf. Ash reacted in time, preventing his master from harming the beast. Okuda realized that the wolf belonged to the same species as Ash, and at the same time showed no aggression. He realized that the animal was not dangerous and let it go, saying that it could rest easy, but it would be better for it not to come back. Later that evening, while thinking about wind magic, he came to an unexpected conclusion. With its help, one can, for example, quickly dry hair. He asked Ash with a smile if he liked the feeling. Then his gaze fell on the bracelet on his wrist, and he remembered that he had never thanked Sarasa for this gift. He thought he would call Juno over, so that they could choose a gift in return. He remembered that Juno lived in the tavern where he had once received help. Since he had been there before, finding his way was not difficult. Okuda walked down to the bar on the first floor of the tavern and headed towards the counter. At that moment, one man, having spoken a few words to the girl with difficulty, hurried away. Okuda wondered if he had become an accidental obstacle. The girl greeted him in a friendly manner. He explained that he was Juno's friend and asked what room he was in. The girl replied that Juno lived in room number 202. Okuda was relieved that he had been understood and went up to the second floor. When he got to the right door, he knocked and, hearing no answer, said that he was coming in. The door opened and he saw Juno. He looked tired and weak. Okuda offered him to wash himself, showing him how to do it. Juno nodded silently in response. Okuda realized that Juno must have been through a lot and decided not to bother him with unnecessary questions. He turned his attention back to the bracelet and, to avoid overburdening Juno with conversation, began writing on the board. He suggested choosing a gift for Sarasa as a token of his gratitude. Juno read the proposal and agreed. When they went outside, Okuda felt worried about him. He admitted that he didn't understand the words Juno was trying to say, but his feelings were clear to him. He remembered his own difficult moments when he had a friend there to just listen. Okuda came to the conclusion that sometimes people don't need advice. They just need someone to confirm that their feelings are real. He felt that Juno had been through a lot. Even if he couldn't understand him in words, he clearly felt his pain, sadness, and inner struggle. That was enough to truly understand him. At the end, Juno thanked him for the day and said goodbye. Okuda responded warmly, wished him all the best, and noted that they would definitely see each other again. Okuda continued to train his wind magic, reciting the wind spell out loud. He apologized to Ash, explaining that he was doing this to watch his magic grow stronger. At that moment, Margot appeared next to him and called out to him. Okuda was surprised inside and began to think about the reason for his appearance. He guessed that perhaps Margot had not yet expressed her gratitude for the bracelet Sarasa had given her. Thoughts about how difficult it was to understand another person's feelings came to mind. At the same time, he remembered that he and Juno had immediately thanked Sarasa. After that, Okuda told Juno to thank him too. As a result of all that had happened, they stayed overnight at his place. Okuda thought with a bit of irony that his house was turning into a hotel. He also recalled hearing that other adventurers, unable to stand the behavior of one of the nobles, left the city and moved their bases to other places. Okuda concluded that something similar had happened that time in the tavern. He thought that any person in their right mind would have gone as far away as possible from such a disgusting person. Okuda couldn't sleep. He was overcome with a feeling of fear, and he admitted it to himself. A period surfaced in his memories when, even in the previous world, he wanted complete solitude. Then he would turn off his phone and not respond to messages, seeking silence and solitude. However, after some time, he would again be drawn to people, and he would return to communication. The same thing happened with social networks. At first he would delete his accounts, but then he would restore them again, continuing to contact people around him. One of the reasons he wanted to move to the countryside was that he was tired of socializing at work. The fake smiles he saw every day disgusted him. He believed that he would never communicate with people again and strove for complete self-sufficiency, trying to have as little contact with others as possible. Even after finding himself in a new world, he felt that his desire for solitude had not disappeared. It seemed to him that rare meetings and short conversations with someone would be quite enough. With Juno, Margot, and Sarasa, or at least he thought so. Reflecting on all this, Okuda came to the conclusion that he could not be completely sure that his desire for solitude would not return. He was convinced that the worst enemy for any person is himself. Reflections do not give rest, and the more a person indulges in them, the deeper he plunges into inner darkness. He realized that he was not looking for an answer, but was only drowning in an abyss of despair. Feeling like a fool who had once again invented unnecessary worries for himself, he thought that since the beginning of his new life here, his long-rooted false smile had finally disappeared. He felt that he had found something truly valuable, and his heart found peace for the first time in a long time. The peculiar relationship with these three comrades became something significant for him, and he was sure that they would remain with him for the rest of his life. The next morning, he finished his morning foraging and was about to prepare breakfast, informing the others. Suddenly, members of the nobility entered his house. The appearance of the nobles was completely unexpected, and Okuda immediately realized that something unusual was happening. He began to wonder if anyone really believed that the same squad could capture a dungeon, especially without proper preparation. It seemed completely impossible to him. He noted that when a person's anger reaches its limit, his face becomes completely impassive. Unfortunately, Okuda knew that at such moments he had to put on a mask and smile. A nobleman named Byroon approached him and addressed him by name. Okuda immediately became wary and wondered what exactly he wanted from him. Byroon began to speak in his own language, which he did not understand. Suddenly, something shocking happened. One of Byron's hands was cut off. Thus, even though the pace was slow, the wounds that tormented Byroon deep in his heart began to heal gradually. He kept the faith that with time, everything would surely get better and find its proper order. The memories of his former self made him feel terrified, because that person had completely lost his mind. After the tragic incident that happened in the past, he himself had also become a madman, having lost the clarity of thought. However, at the moment, he firmly believed that he was no longer in a state of insanity. Byroon finally came to the realization of how deep and excruciating the pain people felt in their hearts was. He realized that the suffering from wounds and the loss of close comrades was one of the most unbearable feelings. A deep pain gripped his chest as he thought about those who had died because of his inaction. Thinking about it made him want to stab his past self. So much regret for the atrocities he had committed had accumulated inside him that his entire body began to tremble with the realization of guilt. At one point, when he witnessed his son acting and making decisions, Shukara couldn't hold back tears of joy. Heinrich, his son, had taken on the responsibility of running the city council and was handling the task with remarkable composure. For Byroon, everything related to taxes and administrative matters seemed complicated and confusing. But his son showed himself to be a true leader. Henry proved to be a magnificent and worthy man. Byroon himself was becoming increasingly convinced of his own unworthiness to be a ruler. He believed that he was the one to blame for what had happened. Although no one knew it, he began to feel afraid of the looks of the people around him, which seemed to him full of condemnation. The symptoms of anxiety were intensifying as it seemed to him. In the past, he had acted mindlessly, without feeling any pressure, doing whatever came to his mind. Now he felt the weight of responsibility that could completely break him. He sincerely wanted to see the city flourish, filled with life and joy. While the villagers may have thought it would be better if he remained in his madness, he knew it would not make things better. Locking himself in a room would be easy, but it would not help him fulfill his duty to the people. He remembered the residents he knew and those he had hurt with his actions. At some point, he gathered all his remaining courage and told Shurak that he would do everything he could to revive the city. Even though his body still trembled when meeting people, he had already recovered enough to respond to being called by name. One day, Shuraku approached him and apologized. It turned out that his son, Heinrich, had increased the tax on the reward for killing monsters, and had entered into an alliance with the guild to jointly solve all the city's problems. Byroon thought it would be great if his son continued to rule the city, but Shuraku expected him to agree to this. Along with this realization came the understanding of how much suffering he had caused Shurak. Byroon felt ashamed for having once forced the guildmaster to bow his head before him. Now he clearly understood how strong and deep the pain was for Shuraku. Overcoming his excitement, he bowed before Shurak and expressed his regret. Byroon's thoughts became clearer. He understood that Shuraku was beginning to worry about him, but he knew that he could not stop halfway. He admitted that as a person he had made many mistakes, and one of the worst was forcing others to bow their heads before him. Only recently had he come to this conclusion. As he thought further, he realized that there were still many people he owed an apology to. Among them were the innocent adventurers he had once unjustly sent to prison. He suspected that many of them now harbored hatred toward him. His actions had caused a lot of problems that affected the entire city. Shuraku had suggested that it might be best for Byron to leave now, and he couldn't help but agree. Over time, it began to seem to him that Henry was trying to avoid communicating with him. He didn't know what his son was thinking and assumed he might raise taxes. But then Henry declared that it was the guild's responsibility to ensure the city's safety. This decision was the result of their mutual discussion. Byroon was not sure whether his son did it out of respect for him, but he knew that he could not understand all his motives. He felt that he had failed as a father and as a man. If his son were to one day follow in his footsteps and use his power to harm others, causing them suffering, Byron was ready to guide him on the right path. He considered it his unwavering duty as a parent. He, Lester von Beirun, although not fully restored, could already walk freely around his residence and its surroundings. Byron went to every neighborhood and apologized to the residents. If he had the chance, he would have liked to improve relations with everyone. He finally realized how difficult it is to achieve true forgiveness. For this reason, he made every effort. Byron knew that nothing would change if he locked himself in his room again and remained isolated. He asked the butler to take care of the horse named Melty. The butler accepted the order and promised to carry it out. Byron thought that he had a reliable guard next to him on whom he could rely. Then he bowed and expressed his gratitude to Tony for his protection. In response, Tony affirmatively said that he would continue to fulfill his duty. Byron said with confidence that he, Byron, would fulfill his duty as a nobleman. He declared that from now on he would do everything possible to atone for all his sins. Suddenly, a monster appeared, and its appearance disturbed the peace. At that moment, Shiraku loudly shouted out Beirun's name, worried about him. Next to them, Juno spoke words about the direction of escape, expressing confusion in the face of danger. In turn, Okuda responded briefly, saying that he understood everything and realized the situation. Using magic, he managed to put up a defense that could give them shelter. In his thoughts, Okuda felt a paralyzing fear as his legs refused to obey him, and he hoped to remain unnoticed by the monster. Meanwhile, Sarasa bandaged Byron's wound and reassured him, repeating that everything should be fine, as if trying to convince not only herself, but everyone else as well. In a daze, Okuda spoke the words that they were able to survive, trying to establish that thought. Juno turned to him with concern, showing that she was worried about his condition. He responded in the affirmative, assuring that he was fine. However, inside he knew that despite his outward calm, he could not do anything and felt helpless, but at the same time he felt that he had a task that needed to be completed immediately. Okuda busied himself with brewing potions, hoping that they would be useful. He thought that even with magical support and potions, it would be extremely difficult to restore a severed arm, and the only consolation was that no one had died in that attack. He also smelled blood coming from him and decided he needed to take a bath, but noticed that the fog was starting to thicken and it was bound to happen during the day. He later arrived at the guild building, where he approached Dan with a request to increase the reward for the quest. He remembered that the guild had already posted a request for the subjugation of the monster, but he had deliberately decided to increase the reward to attract more experienced and powerful adventurers. It turned out that the enemy they had thought was a simple creature was actually a lower dragon, and if he had targeted Okuda himself, he would have inevitably died. He felt an inner tension, thinking about how long he would have to live in constant fear and in anticipation of new attacks. Returning home, he began to check whether he was really alone, and tried to convince himself that there was no one around. He thought about visiting Margot, but then came to the conclusion that no place would protect him from a possible attack, and death would be inevitable, regardless of location. He decided to stay home and try to distract himself with something. Thoughts were spinning in his head, and he did not know whether to be happy or sad about the thick fog that had enveloped his home. Okuda tried to overcome his fear by drawing. However, his hands did not stop shaking, which prevented him from concentrating. By morning, he realized that he had not slept a wink all night. Seeing a cheerful dog named Ash, he noted to himself that perhaps he should have gone to Margot's and gotten drunk until he passed out. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice at the door, and it turned out to be Margot and Juno. Okuda opened the door and admitted that this unexpected visit had scared him greatly. Margot showed a drawing of a dragon on a piece of paper. He then tore the paper, which surprised Okuda. He felt relieved, realizing that the threat had passed. Later, in his thoughts, he came to the conclusion that the huge lizard, which they mistook for a monster from the forest dungeon, had in fact flown in from distant lands and simply happened to be nearby. It turned out that high-level adventurers had already defeated her in another city. Peaceful days had returned, and a feeling of lightness filled his soul. However, he knew that in the future, other monsters might appear and attack. When he noticed the new creature, he immediately realized that it was a monster. He realized that the creature had gotten lost in the fog and had accidentally ended up at his house. He began to assess the situation. The system provided data that this was a fighting bull, a cow-like monster that lived near water in the Lancaster region. Okuda noted that it was a bull, although at first he thought it was a cow. After the fear subsided, he began to be tormented by hunger. He thought that Margot and Juno were to blame for everything, for showing him too much kindness. Perhaps it was because he witnessed a nobleman's arm being cut off. He expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that all the cooking was left on his shoulders. However, he noticed that the thick fog had already disappeared. Okuda proposed a feast that included steaks, matsunabe, smoked meats, liver, and a variety of other meat dishes. The friends began their meal and spent their time happily. Later, they admired the night sky. Okuda noted that Margot snores very loudly and remembered the shimeno soup he forgot to drink. He looked at his friends and thought that they looked quite tired. He realized inside that he could now be frank with them. He felt that a relationship had been established between them in which they could call each other best friends. The soup had done nothing to counteract the effects of the night's drinking. He warmed it up, noting in his mind that the herbs were indeed powerful. When they gathered again, he asked them to accompany him into the forest to collect herbs. His friends agreed, and he expressed his gratitude. He thought about how strange and pleasant it was to realize that even in a forest full of dangers, his heart was filled with peace. They collected a large quantity of herbs, and he was pleased with the result. Suddenly, Margot called out to Juno and Okuda. He responded and immediately noticed the approach of monsters. Okuda saw a blue wolf fighting another monster. He decided to help it from afar, shooting with a bow. Okuda's level has increased, now reaching 14. He thought that he did not want to take someone else's prey, but his arrow became the final blow. Later, he thanked his friends for their help and suggested leaving a request in the guild to subjugate a lower dragon in case of a possible threat. Margot accepted this offer. Okuda thanked him again and said goodbye. He listened to the buzzing of the beetles, finding peace in it. Thinking about the future brought him to tears. Okuda didn't understand why he was crying, because he hadn't even had a drink that day. He remembered saying he preferred solitude. An understanding arose within him that the warmth that once entered the heart could never be forgotten. When everyone left, he felt loneliness, especially acutely. Okuda realized that all good things come to an end. The fun, the singing, the cool night wind, the buzzing of bugs. He was overcome with fear that the night filled with loneliness would never end. He could not understand what was happening to him. It may have been a reaction to recent stressful events. He decided to calm down by drinking a cup of herbal tea. Even though he understood the reasons for his condition, he did not want to accept the truth. Okuda, I realized that I had become an adult who could not let go of his loneliness. When he woke up in the morning, he felt dizzy and realized that his body had become heavy. He was overcome by heat, and he realized that he was really sick. He tried to cook food for the chicken, but his strength left him. He eventually lost consciousness. Shiraku, as the master of the Adventurers Guild of Leicester, noted that recently the nobleman Byron, who ran the city, had been mistreating adventurers. There had been a huge influx of complaints coming in through the worker Dan. As the guildmaster, Shiraku felt obliged to speak to Byron. His position gave him a seat on the city council. The guild promised to destroy the monsters and take over the dungeon. Shiraku explained to Beirun all the details and risks involved in this undertaking. However, Byron continued to insist on the subjugation of the cockatrice. Shiraku tried to reach him, but it was all in vain. He could no longer stand aside while many adventurers gave their lives in vain. Byron also did not allow the hiring of new workers. The only ones who could handle the cockatrice were Juno, Margot, and Okuda. Okuda was an expert in healing and could cure petrification. There was also a group of 3 who defeated the snake, recognized as one of the strongest in Leicester. The martial arts teacher Kai could also give a worthy rebuff to the cockatrice. No one expected to meet several cockatrices. Only thanks to Okuda, they managed to avoid death. Words cannot describe how grateful Shiraku was to him. Beirun only offered 5 gold coins as a reward. No adventurer would risk his life for such a paltry sum. Dan looked at Shiraku with empty eyes, but he was powerless. The honor of the guild was at stake, so using his and the guild's savings, he managed to raise the required amount. After this, Shiraku advised Beirun to give in. He tried to persuade him many times, which caused his hair to fall out. At that time, a hole began to form inside the stomach, but the symptoms appeared on the head. In the end, Beirun ordered the same people who were there last time to be gathered. Shurak had to bow his head again and again to disturb Keigo again, Okudo asking for forgiveness for the suddenness. Beirun did not respond to the requests. Shuraku regretted that he was such a lousy guildmaster. When Beirun dismounted to invite him, he was attacked by a lower dragon, which tore off his right arm. Shuraku tried to fight back the monster to protect Beirun. Eventually, he managed to drive the monster away. From then on, Beirun hid in his room. According to the butler, he did not come out. Food was brought to him at the door. He talked to the statue of a horse. This state of affairs had a negative impact on the city. Henry, Beirun's son, talked to his father and soon became the heir to the family. Henry was the complete opposite of his father, very wise. Thus, Shuraku's restless heart found peace. Beirun, a nobleman who lost his right arm in a fight with a lesser dragon, felt a deep fear of the world around him. This fear led him to lock himself in his room, refusing to go outside. To alleviate his loneliness, he ordered his favorite horse named Melty to be brought to his chambers. This behavior made people around him suspect he was crazy. Byron felt like people were making fun of him, which increased his anxiety and paranoia. He began to fear even birds and insects, wanting to punish anyone he felt was laughing at him. His involvement in the running of the city was greatly reduced, and he avoided meeting people, as it caused him great anxiety and trembling in his remaining hand. The loss of his right hand made it difficult for him to eat, and voices in his head told him that he deserved his suffering. Beirun did not consider himself crazy, but he admitted that he was afraid of everything around him. The servants became cold towards him. He suffered from insomnia and wanted to disappear from this world, cursing everything around him. He couldn't remember the last time he got out of bed, and felt disconnected from his former self. During this difficult period, the guildmaster Shuraku showed his concern for Byron by finding someone who could remove Melty's petrification. This act gave Byron the will to live. He began to leave his room in the daylight again to be near Melty, and gradually gained a sense of happiness. His sleep problems began to diminish, although he still found it difficult to look his servants in the eye. The voice quietly and caringly announced that it had brought a canned peach, expressing hope for a speedy recovery. Okuda responded with gratitude and called her mommy. Okuda woke up. He realized that everything that had just happened was just a dream, and not reality. His first thought was the realization that the fever that had been tormenting him had finally disappeared, and he felt a great sense of relief. He noted with alarm that he had lain unconscious for several days, after losing strength and collapsing from exhaustion. That day he was busy feeding the chickens and apologized to them for not having had time to prepare the food before he collapsed from fatigue. Okuda added with relief that his health had already improved, and by a lucky coincidence, no customers had come while he was sick. He bitterly admitted to himself that he was seriously afraid of dying completely alone, without anyone's help. Okuda thought about the concept of kodokushi, which refers to dying alone and not being found until a long time later. With sadness in his heart, he thought of his mother, with whom he could no longer communicate. A painful thought crossed his mind that she probably thought he had simply left home and abandoned everything. Okuda felt a great deal of pain, as he thought about how dear the people around him had become to him after everything that had happened to him. He thought with hope that everything would be fine with Margot and the others, despite his absence. Rather self-reproachfully, he called himself useless, admitting that although the fever had passed, he still needed rest. He decided that the day should be spent calmly, allowing himself to relax and make a couple of potions. As he watched the potion brewing process, his gaze fell on a familiar figure. He saw Juno. Okuda immediately recognized him and noted to himself that he had not seen this man for quite a long time. He learned that Juno had come with an offer to go on a subjugation mission, but explained that he had only recently recovered from an illness. Due to fatigue and general weakness, Okuda politely declined the offer. Juno, accepting the refusal, calmly turned around and said goodbye, promising to return tomorrow. Okuda wished him luck in return as he watched him leave. After their short conversation, he thought about his symptoms again and remembered Juno mentioning that there was a doctor in town. He concluded that potions were not always effective in dealing with fever and decided that going to the hospital would be a wise move. Later, while inspecting his supplies, Okuda noted that he had managed to make quite a large number of potions. At this time, Juno approached him again, calling him by name. Okuda asked with slight surprise whether he had just been hunting, judging by his appearance and tired look. Okuda noticed medicinal plants and food in Juno's cart, leading him to assume that Juno had gone to town first rather than on a mission straight away. Juno explained that these were all for Okuda. Okuda was touched and expressed gratitude, although he had nothing to thank Juno with except the potions. He invited Juno to stay the night, glad to have a friend by his side, especially in difficult times. Juno said a lot happened while Okuda was sick. Okuda decided to stop being lazy, but first he wanted to get a good night's sleep. In the morning, Juno said goodbye to Okuda, who wished him luck. After a good night's sleep, Okuda felt much better and decided to stretch. Byron, a nobleman whom Okuda had previously considered an idiot, appeared. This time, Byron was not accompanied by adventurers. Okuda decided not to mention that the three of them were going into the forest. Byron bowed and apologized to Okuda, which surprised the latter. Okuda couldn't believe his ears and wondered in his mind if this was really happening. Soon, Beirun handed him a heavy bag. Okuda was surprised by the weight of the bag and noted that there were about 500 gold coins inside. He wondered what Beirun wanted to achieve with this act. Concluding that this was compensation for past inconveniences, he admitted that such an act was unexpected and rare. Recalling their last meeting, he noted that Byron seemed to have become a decent man. Looking at his sincere posture, he believed that he was truly repentant. Now that the threat from the nobleman had disappeared, Okuda had no reason to refuse the gift. He decided to start small, to treat Byron with something delicious. The scene that played out in his home seemed familiar and warm to him. He remembered that smoked meat was popular, especially among the nobility. Tony, the nobleman's bodyguard, told him that his master had now been replaced by his son. Okuda realized that many changes had occurred during his illness. He started cooking. He fried a whole hare with garlic, salt, and herbs. Believing that such a dish would appeal to a person of the upper class, he gave it his all in the culinary arts. But the look on Byron's face at the tasting was unexpected. Okuda realized that the effort was worth it. A dog named Ash came to him looking for a treat. Okuda assured her that there would be food for her too, and added that she should eat her vegetables too. Noting the direction of the nobleman and Tony's path, he noticed that they were heading towards the forest and the stables, and not towards the city. He tried to restrain them, but it was tiring. They looked like drunken commoners, and he thought he should give them some shimeno soup after they woke up. In the morning, as expected, he found them in a pitiful state, although he was still shocked by it. He said goodbye to them, wishing them to take care of themselves. Now that he had saved up a lot of money, it was time to think about using it wisely. He went to a merchant he knew to discuss future investments. In town, he met with Margot, Juno, and Sarasa. They discussed installing crossbows and building stone walls around his property, considering that stone was stronger than dirt. He also expressed a desire for a bath and a proper bedroom. Considering that he still had a lot of money left, he complained about being tired of living in a chicken coop. They agreed on further cooperation. With the help of his friends, he arranged meetings with artisans and suppliers of building materials. He also visited a doctor named Kishu, sensei, to make sure that medical care was available. Although he did not know the exact level of medicine in this world, he was pleased with the mere existence of doctors. He instructed Sarasa to deliver everything he had bought, including materials and food, to his home. Okuda decided to smoke the meat as a token of gratitude to his friends for their help. Realizing that he could no longer return to the hermit lifestyle, he thanked them from the bottom of his heart. A few days later, he looked around with admiration at the erected protective wall, the bed, and the bedroom. He described his new home as a fortress, a dream come true. Okuda hoped that wild creatures such as snakes and flying lizards would no longer see him as prey. He sincerely thanked everyone who helped him. Margot came up to him and called out loudly. Okuda suggested celebrating the completion of the construction and offered him a drink. Margot asked if Sarasa was nearby, and he replied that she was not. Thinking about it, Okuda thought that Margot might be avoiding meeting her. Margot raised his glass and proposed to drink to the completion of the construction. Okuda noted that he hadn't had time to try the shimeno soup yet again. He remembered drinking with his best friend until the early hours of the morning, and thought that it was a worthy cause for celebration. He came to the conclusion that they were both hopeless adults. The next morning he woke up with a heavy head. He He was convinced that giving up the shimeno soup had indeed been a fatal mistake. Okuda lay on the ground, thinking that he had become lazy again. It had been a few days since his house had been completed. With the stone walls erected, he felt a long-awaited sense of security, and it was this security that made him relax. With the feeling of threat gone, the energy he usually spent on everyday activities dropped from 10% to only 3%. He still had gold coins, so there was no need to worry about work. This allowed him to sleep and wake up whenever he wanted. It seemed that the dreams he had cherished earlier were beginning to come true. Perhaps he had rested too much the day before. It was still very early, the sun had not even risen yet, but he was already awake. He was the first one to open his eyes that morning. Even the animals around him were still sleeping peacefully. In these precious moments of silence and peace, he decided that it was time to collect his thoughts. He was glad that Juno's feelings for Sarasa were mutual. However, from the outside, it seemed that Sarasa also had some sympathy for Margot. Okuda wondered if Juno had given up on trying to win her favor. It would have been easier if he had found someone else, but Okuda knew that Juno was a good guy and probably didn't suffer from a lack of female attention. As for Margot himself, he continued to avoid Sarasa's persistent attempts to attract his attention. However, it seemed that success was just around the corner. Besides that, Okuda remembered Byronum. The loss of his arm could be one of the reasons for his recent behavior. The gold he gave to Okuda as an apology turned out to be incredibly useful. It was used to build a stone wall and became a real salvation. He came to the conclusion that there was no point in holding a grudge against Beirun any longer. His attention turned to Byron's son, who now ruled the city. According to Margot and the others, this man was one of those who abused power. Although Okuda did not seek contact with the nobles, he was ready to intervene if something serious happened. He remembered the many people he had met: Secretary Dan, the guildmaster Shuraku, Kai-sensei, Han-sensei, who taught him useful skills. 3 adventurers, a mason and craftsman, thanks to whose work he had a house and stone walls. Later he met Dr. Keisha, a Byron guard named Tony, a baker named Taylor, and many others. So many people took care of him. In the previous world, he was just trying to survive and had no time to think about others. He came to the realization that no matter how much a person denies it, it is impossible to live without the help of others. He resisted this understanding until the very end. However, there were things he did not want to forget. His dog Ash remained the cutest, fluffiest creature in the world to him, and he wanted that to never change. The days were getting shorter. Autumn would soon come, and then winter. With the first snow, he was going to ask Margot to install a fireplace. The thought of taking a bath and watching the snow fall brought him pleasure. He hadn't done anything special for the past few days, so he decided that after sleeping, he should take a bath. In the morning, Okuda remembered leaving his fishing rod somewhere. He was sure he had left it here, and finally found it. It looked quite functional. He used a local worm as bait and went fishing. Once he reached the river, he noted that there seemed to be no monsters in the area. For the first time in a long time, he could sit quietly by the water. Suddenly, the fishing rod jerked. He caught something. It was an ayu fish. He decided to taste it. This fish could be used for sashimi if it was parasite-free. His experience in cutting fish in Japan had finally come in handy. He carefully began cutting it up, then tried it. As expected, the fish was very tasty. The system confirmed that the fish was indeed tasty. He thought about how best to prepare it: pickle, fry, or make sashimi. He decided to catch more, but ended up falling asleep. When he woke up, he felt joy that his friends were nearby and everything was okay with them. Okuda realized that it was time to end his fishing and move on. He stood up, called his horse, Rasenide, and set off. Okuda returned home and was delighted to find that his friends had already arrived. There was an air of preparation inside. Everyone was bustling about, anticipating the celebration. The coincidence was fortunate. He had just caught a lot of fresh fish, so the evening promised to be especially delicious. He suggested raising his glasses, because such meetings require real treats and a warm feast. The friendly cooking began. Okuda began preparing the fish, carefully grating the garlic, explaining where to put it, and began making the sashimi himself. He remembered that he had never seen anyone serve raw fish in the city, and was curious to see how his guests would like this Japanese delicacy. When everything was ready, he announced that the food was served and invited everyone to the table. The first course was shioyaki, fried fish with salt, followed by sashimi. Sarasa was surprised by the new food, and Okuda showed how to properly squeeze lemon juice and emphasized how delicious sashimi is when served correctly. Looking at their expressions, he realized that this was their first experience with such cuisine. He was happy to see how much they enjoyed it. At this point, he noticed that Juno looked a little depressed. He smiled and invited him to try more food, assuring him that the taste would definitely bring him back to life. However, Juno, a little confused, mixed up the dishes, calling sashimi shioyaki, and the situation became slightly awkward. Okuda pretended that nothing had happened, and again offered everyone a drink to maintain the festive atmosphere. He felt that the atmosphere had calmed down a bit, and decided to liven it up by congratulating Margot and Sarasa, since their behavior the day before had been so touching that it hinted at an imminent wedding. And indeed, the young couple confirmed his guess and thanked him for his kind words. He soon learned that they were planning to hold the wedding ceremony at his home in 2 days, and would invite only their closest family members. Okuda noted that Juno seemed particularly dejected, but when he looked at the guest list, he noticed the name Elsa, Juno's girlfriend. A thought of surprise flashed through his mind. It turns out Juno already has a lover. This meant that all the conversations yesterday, filled with sympathy and consolation, were in vain. However, he could not be angry. On the contrary, joy for his friend overwhelmed him. After the evening was over, Sarasa thanked him for everything, and they said goodbye until the next meeting. Okuda was left alone, wondering how to celebrate his best friend's wedding. With only 2 days left until the celebration, he began planning a bath, entertainment, food. He decided to start with cooking. Since everyone loved fish, he went fishing and even sacrificed his chickens. The wedding day approached. In the morning, the fishing was successful. The catch was excellent. He prepared yakitori, putting his care and love into each dish. He was especially proud of the breaded chicken, which he considered a top-class dish. All that was left was to prepare fresh fish. When everything was almost ready, the heroes of the occasion arrived, Margot and Sarasa. Juno followed them and introduced his companion, Lady Elsa. Okuda greeted her warmly. Inside, he felt a slight recognition. She was the daughter of the owner of the tavern where Juno lived. His thoughts raced. He realized how lucky Juno was, because Elsa was not only beautiful, but also good-natured. He was truly happy for his friend, because he knew what difficulties he had to go through. After congratulating Juno, he turned his attention to the final preparations. Beirun's son suddenly appeared. His presence caused general surprise. Okuda noted that this was the first time he had seen this man. When Margot turned pale at the sight of the guest, it became clear that his appearance did not bode well. He did not fully understand what was happening, but he was sure of one thing. Only a savage could ruin such a special day. The blue wolf is a proud hunter of the dense and wild forest, free and harsh. He was born into a pack where a wise and strong leader reigned, with whom he was connected by respect, loyalty, and the spirit of unity. But one day, a man entered their lives, strange and formidable, with powers beyond anything the blue wolf had ever encountered. This man was of high rank in his kind, and wielded a strange alien magic. He defeated the leader in a brutal fight, leaving him no chance, and, taking the leader's cub with him, he walked away, leaving the pack orphaned and shaken. The wolf understood that if he had rushed into the attack that day, he would have died without a doubt, because without preparation and understanding of the magical nature of the enemy, he did not have a chance. With their leader gone, the pack was left without direction, and the pup's fate was in the hands of a human. Although this was alarming at first, over time the blue wolves began to notice that the human was not harming the cub. In fact, he was protecting it, caring for it as if it were his own. The world they lived in was cruel. The strongest survived here, and no rules could change this natural order. However, in the heart of a devoted beast, another feeling is born: respect. Realizing the impossibility of fighting, the blue wolves adopted another form of loyalty. From then on, they decided to watch the puppy and his new protector from afar. Not to interfere directly, but to come to his aid when he was in danger. As a sign of respect for the puppy and his human, from time to time they scared away other wild creatures that could harm them. But one day, something unexpected happened. One of the blue wolves came too close to the camp and was influenced by strange magic. He lost control and was wounded. At the moment when he was ready to accept his fate, a puppy appeared in front of him, now grown up, who covered the wolf with his body, not thinking about his own safety. The beast's heart beat faster. It was a shock, because in a world where the law kill or be killed rules, such an act of kindness was truly rare. The man, this unusual, almost alien wolf, not only did not turn away, but also treated his wounds, healed him, showed concern. This once again confirmed. Before them was not just a man, but something different, deeper, nobler. Another day, when a man and a puppy went to the lake to fish, the wolves, as usual, guarded them from a distance. Their peace was disturbed by the sudden appearance of a bear, who intended to attack. Then the blue wolves entered the battle, fighting with all their might until they drove the beast away. When they returned from the fight, they saw a touching picture. A puppy, tired but whole, peacefully resting in the arms of a man. This sight touched even the rough heart of the warrior of the forest. Later, when the wolves returned to their camp, they found it empty. There were no people, but freshly caught fish and a wooden cup with a potion were left there, as if left in gratitude. It was a sign. The man knew everything about wolves, knew about their help, and appreciated it. The wolf admitted his defeat, not in battle, but before the humanity and kindness of this unusual man. Since then, despite the fact that much time has passed, the blue wolves continue to guard the territory where this man and his ward live. In their hearts is the hope that the puppy will grow up strong, wise, and fair. After all, blue wolves are not just animals. They are intelligent creatures of this forest, loyal, proud, and able to feel. Elsa is the owner of a tavern and bar in the city of Leicester, a place where the destinies of many wanderers, artisans, and adventurers converge. Thanks to her sensitivity and practicality, she managed to create not just an establishment, but a real home for those who cannot afford their own housing. In particular, for poor adventurers who live on combat earnings and are always on the verge between life and death. Elsa's tavern provides the most affordable lodging in the area, which makes it almost a home for those who are looking not only for a roof over their heads, but also warmth, care, food, and sympathy. Among the regulars of the establishment is Juno, an adventurer with a kind heart and an indomitable spirit. Elsa has known him and his friend Sarasa since childhood. For many years, she had warm feelings for him, which over time turned into true love. However, Juno's heart belonged to another, Sarasa. Elsa saw it immediately, unmistakably, because a person in love feels even the shadows of someone else's sympathy. The pain of realizing this love was silent but sharp, because Sarasa did not return Juno's feelings. She was in love with Margot, a master blacksmith, a talented merchant who could handle metal like an artist with a brush. And despite the bitterness, Elsa had to admit, they really were right for each other. Meanwhile, Juno was suffering. His love was tearing him apart. He was losing weight, becoming sullen and distant. He, whose life depended on physical strength, was allowing himself to waste away. Elsa tried to support him, caring for him, feeding him, coaxing him to eat, but he pushed her away with words, sometimes harsh ones. And yet she stayed close, endured, did not leave. Her love did not demand anything in return. It simply was. Every morning, Elsa looked at herself in the mirror, examining her freckles, which Juno had once found charming. She knew that Sarasa was not only beautiful on the outside, but also a kind-hearted, worthy woman. But despite this, Elsa's heart was breaking with envy, with bitterness, with the desire to be in the place of the one to whom Juno would dedicate his soul. And then everything changed. Just when Elsa was about to give in, Juno said what she had been waiting for. He wanted her to be his girlfriend. His words tore down her inner barriers, causing the tears to flow freely. They had a frank conversation about how Margot had once managed to let go of the spirit of his late wife Isabella, and how Juno had found the strength to let go of his feelings for Sarasa. Elsa, of course, still feels a little uneasy, remembering his old love, but now there are no more secrets between them. He knows that she loves him, and this makes her happy. It was the brightest day of her life. On Margot and Sarasa's wedding day, Elsa dressed up in a special way. She wore her favorite dress, the same shoes she had been saving for a special occasion, and jewelry, an earring that Juno had once given her. She didn't hide her freckles with makeup. Juno said he liked them. and she decided to be herself, accepting herself completely. The wedding took place at the house of Juno's friend Okuda. Elsa remembered how he once came to her tavern. With his charisma, black as night hair, and kind look, he left an indelible impression on her memory. And he also had the cutest puppy, who literally won her heart. And now she is happy, because she saw him again. In Elsa's heart there is a slight excitement and joy, anticipation of something good and bright. With love in her heart, with faith in the future, and with her inner strength, she goes to meet a new day. In the city of Leicester, the new ruler was Lord Henry, the son of the previous ruler who was known for his tyranny. In an effort to distinguish himself from his father, Henry made efforts to gain the trust of the townspeople, winning over influential people and ordinary citizens to his side, which strengthened his position. People began to call him wise, and he enjoyed the feeling of power, knowing that his decisions determined reality. Wanting to retain power, Henry imposed high taxes on the population, forcing people to work for him until they were exhausted. When his father attempted to regain control by increasing taxes to support the Adventurers Guild and the army, Heinrich managed to crush his ambitions and regain control of the city. Considering his problem solved, he began to consider his next steps. While studying the city's economy, Henry noticed Margot's weapon shop, which sold fire and water daggers, helping to revive the economy. Wanting to take advantage of this, Henry decided to establish control over Margot and his activities. However, according to information from his subordinates, Margot stopped selling such weapons, which led to the idea that he had a hidden source. Finding the store closed, Heinrich noticed Margot and his companion's carriage leaving the city. Guessing that their destination might reveal the source of the unusual daggers, he ordered 4 subordinates to follow them. Henry was determined to make Margot pay her bills and make a double profit from the situation. Okuda was stunned by what was happening and tried to figure out the situation. He noticed a stranger who entered his house uninvited and expressed his indignation about it. Okuda tried to call security, but to no avail. Realizing that arguing with an influential person was useless, he decided to use sashimi as a means to diffuse the situation and offered the uninvited guest to try this dish. At this moment, Byron appeared and addressed Henry, which allowed Okuda to understand that the stranger was Byron's son. Okuda realized that their argument was related to family differences. Since it was a special day, he urged everyone to calm down and listen to him carefully. Byron tried the sashimi and was pleasantly surprised by its taste. Margot confirmed that it was sashimi. Okuda expressed his joy that the dish was liked and suggested leaving some for the other guests. Realizing that the more people, the merrier, he suggested inviting everyone to Margot and Sarasa's wedding. Henry agreed to attend the event. Margot thanked Okuda for his help, to which he replied that it was no problem. Okuda noted that he had not expected so many helpers and believed that now was not the time for quarrels. Preparations for the party were in full swing, and finally, the long-awaited moment had arrived. Byron turned to Margot and Sarasa as they entered the hall. Okuda noted that he rarely saw Margot in a jacket, and the moon-colored dress perfectly highlighted Sarasa's beauty. Margot and Sarasa exchanged vows and put on rings, after which the guests congratulated them. Okuda noted that he had never seen such a wedding in this world, but everyone was smiling without realizing it. The atmosphere suddenly changed, and everyone immediately moved on to the party. Okuda brought out sashimi and chicken, urging the guests to help themselves. The 2 men were performing a strange art, which left Okuda puzzled. He remembered that at similar events, when he was a merchant, there were games with stockings on the head, which gave him goosebumps. He was glad that there were no such competitions in this world. However, he was worried about the lack of a wedding song at the ceremony. Okuda came on stage and announced that he was going to perform a song. As he began to sing, he expressed the anxiety and worry he felt when he was alone. The song conveyed the feeling of friends gradually drifting apart, finding their place in life, and becoming henpecked, as they themselves said. Okuda noted that even without knowing the language, one can feel the meaning of the song with one's heart. After finishing his performance, he congratulated the young people. After the party ended, Sarasa and Elsa said goodbye, saying that they would see each other later. Okuda also said goodbye to them, wishing them all the best. Margot, Sarasa, and Elsa went home, leaving the rest of the guests, who were quite drunk. Okuda, taking charge of them, moved them with difficulty. expressing dissatisfaction with their condition and threatening to throw them into the smelter for such a night. Later, he noted that the night wind was pleasantly refreshing, creating the feeling that all this fuss was just a dream. Reflecting on the events that have happened since his arrival in this world, Okuda noted that humans often contradict themselves, isolating themselves from others and gradually leading to extinction. Despite this, he managed to find friends with whom he wanted to share the best moments of his life: Margot, Juno, Sarasa, Elsa, and, of course, Ash, the cutest creature in the world. He noted that everyone was enchanted by the newlywed smiles, including himself. It was a circle of happiness, with Margot and Sarasa at the center. Okuda noted that he had never seen anything like it in Japan. He reflected on how words could be both a blade and a mirror, sometimes causing pain and sometimes reflecting the truth. Okuda admitted that he had previously avoided this, preferring to decide everything himself rather than rely on others. In a world where they don't speak Japanese and where you have to risk your life fighting monsters, the light of the blue moon falls from the sky directly onto your heart. Okuda wondered if this was all a dream, because then all the contradictions would become clear. He felt that he could now open up to other people, deciding not to rush, but to enjoy what he had. For now, he just wanted to move on with his life, and he looked forward to the contradictions he would face tomorrow. He couldn't help but smile, realizing that he himself had once been a contradictory person. Okuda suggested leaving the cleaning for tomorrow and just relaxing today, noting that his friends were too noisy. He found joy in bringing happiness to others, and now he enjoyed it even more. The day after the wedding ceremony, Okuda decided to continue training in wind magic, seeking to strengthen his skills. While the others were still recovering from the effects of the holiday, he had already returned to his usual routine. Suddenly, Ash's loud barking caught his attention. Okuda turned around and saw a giant snake in front of him. Realizing that there was no time to think and no help to wait for, he decided to act immediately. Okuda tried to attack the serpent with the spell Piercing Arrow, but it had no effect. Realizing that the monster had no obvious weak points, he used the skill's scan to identify the enemy's vulnerabilities. The system reported that Okuda's level had increased, and his scan skill had improved to level 2. From this, he learned that the snake had a skill called Deadly Poison, which could corrode almost anything it touched, but was not immune to toxins. This gave Okuda the idea to turn the snake's poison against itself using the Gust of Wind spell. At this point, the blue wolf came to the rescue, attacking the snake and distracting its attention. Okuda realized that this was a chance to counterattack. Observing the snake's behavior, he tried to predict the moment when it would use its poisonous breath. As soon as the snake opened its mouth, Okuda cast the spell Gust of Wind, directing the poison back at the monster. The snake began to curl up, and some of its scales fell off, revealing a vulnerable spot. Okuda did not miss the opportunity and delivered a decisive blow with his sword, finally defeating his opponent. After the battle, the system notified Okuda that his level had increased to 15. He thanked the blue wolf for his timely help and made sure that he was okay. Later, when Juno learned of Okuda's feat, he was amazed and expressed his surprise. Okuda, himself somewhat shocked by what had happened, together with Juno, tidied up the battle site and handed over the snake's body to the city butcher. Elsa soon appeared, concerned about Juno's condition after the party. Okuda noticed her displeasure and assumed she was angry because Juno had left her alone. He hoped that they could make peace. Reflecting on recent events, Okuda wondered what the serpent's scales could be turned into. He was also worried about the serpent's presence in these parts. He assumed that the dungeon was overrun with monsters again, and that clearing it out alone might not be enough. Okuda realized that he had been lucky in this battle, and that if he had been unarmed, the outcome might have been different. This prompted him to think about further improving his skills and magical abilities. Okuda asked Kai-sensei and Han-sensei to train him. He thought about wind magic, believing that it required more training and experience to improve. Okuda was confident that he would be able to use higher magic like Tornado if he mastered the basic skills perfectly. The next step he considered was unarmed parrying. He also thought that learning a few martial arts techniques wouldn't hurt. Kai demonstrated some moves to him. Okuda mentally exclaimed that he couldn't do that, asking to wait. Inwardly, he was indignant that no one understood how he had managed to live to his age. Okuda didn't want to die while learning a new skill. He realized that he seemed to have no choice. The system notified that Okikego received a new skill. The new skill was called Moon Flip. He exhaled heavily and was surprised to note that he had done it the first time. Okuda thought that this world was unusual. He didn't expect to learn so much here. Okuda convinced himself that there was nothing to be afraid of. He decided to move on to the basics of magic of other elements. The wind, he noted, dealt well with the kites. He remembered that there are only 6 elements: fire, water, wind, earth, light, and darkness. I never thought before that light magic would be so useful at night. He became interested in how far he could advance in his study of light magic. He noticed that the carcass had already been cut up. The butcher reported that it was the most delicious snake meat. Okuda thanked him and asked doubtfully if it was really tasty, offering to sell it. He thought that, knowing the origin of the dish, he didn't really want to eat it. He was surprised to learn that the meat cost as much as 8 gold pieces. He took with him the scales, fangs, and poison glands. The cutter said goodbye to him. Okuda responded and thanked for the help. He figured that there was a high demand for scale armor at the moment and decided to sell it to Margot. Okuda came to Margot's house. Sarasa, seeing the scales, exclaimed in surprise. Margot immediately declared that he was buying it. Sarasa objected that it was hers. Okuda thought that they were husband and wife, and didn't understand why they were arguing. He decided that the scales would be a wedding gift. Considering they were on their honeymoon, he didn't want to interfere with their enjoyment of their vacation. He gave the scales away free of charge. As he was about to leave, he said that he was leaving. Sarasa asked him to wait and handed him the bottle. He realized that this was the same liqueur from the wedding. Even though he said it was a gift, it would have been impolite to refuse. He accepted the liqueur with gratitude. At parting, he wished to see you. At home, he noted that the liqueur was truly excellent. However, sleep overcame him. He thought it had been a very eventful day. Okuda was surprised to feel very tired. He hugged his puppy Ash and told her she was a good one. Okuda noted with satisfaction that the ash wolf's fang had made a worthy necklace, which he hoped would protect him. He took the dagger in his hands and, turning to it, continued to think about the future object, figuring out what could happen to it. After a short pause, he came to the conclusion that water was the best for enchantment, and this caused him to smile cheerfully. He was pleased to realize that he had finally mastered the art of enchantment, although he knew that such tasks were usually performed by Margot. At that moment, Juno's voice suddenly rang out, calling out to Okuda. Okuda flinched in surprise, admitted that he was scared, and asked what he was doing. In response, Juno gestured to him to indicate something that required attention. Okuda didn't understand at first, then he tried to decipher the gestures. He came to the conclusion that he was talking about drinking and hinting at the girl. He decided that Juno was inviting him to a tavern where he could be discharged or meet girls. Juno explained that he was heading home and would return at night. Okuda answered hesitantly, agreeing, although he continued to think that everything that was happening was not at all like Juno's behavior. He began to wonder if something was bothering his friend again, since he clearly didn't want to just chat over a drink. Okuda remembered how in the past he himself was not averse to having a drink after a hard day at work. When evening came and it was already dark, he decided that he would not be able to take the puppy Ash with him, and so decided to leave him with Sarasa. Once in the city, he realized that he was right. Margot came to the shop, and the conversation was about delivering daggers. Margot thanked him, adding that the shop was still open, and invited him in. Okuda replied that he would return soon and moved on. Margot nodded affirmatively, without objecting. Sarasa's shop, Okuda called out her name to get her attention. He noticed that there was no joy on the woman's face, and wondered if he had walked in at the wrong moment. However, upon seeing Ash, Sarasa immediately changed. Her mood became noticeably better. She affectionately named the puppy and expressed her affection, admiring his fluffiness and kind nature. Okuda asked her to look after the dog, explaining that he wanted to spend some time with his friends. He thought that perhaps he should have been honest and said that they were going to the tavern. To clarify the situation, he gestured that the meeting involved fun, alcohol, and possibly the company of girls. Okuda felt that Sarasa's face changed, and he realized that he had made an awkward mistake, causing her displeasure. To smooth things over, he left a coin, calling it compensation, and asked again to take care of the dog. Okuda finally met up with Margot and Juno, thanking them for waiting, and noticing that they had already started drinking. Margot invited him to join, and Okuda agreed with a little trepidation. He began to think that perhaps the tavern would be a place where he could relax and try something new. The meeting place turned out to be a tavern called Butterfly Cradle. Okuda noted that the room was furnished quite simply, and without frills. He was surprised and wondered if they really came here just to eat, because the establishment seemed familiar to him from his memories from the previous world. He didn't expect to find himself in this particular place, but since he had come, he decided not to stay away. He was surprised that there was one girl for each of them. Juno wished him luck with a smile. Okuda didn't immediately understand what exactly it consisted of. One of the girls invited him to sit down next to her. He mentally noted that he had been given a calm and beautiful interlocutor. Okuda greeted her and expressed his joy at meeting her. The girl answered him, clarifying that it was already evening outside. He remembered that it had indeed been dark for a long time, and realized that he was a little nervous. Since communication was difficult, Okuda suggested that the girl correspond via letters. She agreed and wrote her name on the paper, Urina. He offered her a treat, wanting to show her attention. Urina thanked him for his gesture of politeness. Okuda, I felt a little like one accountant from the academy who, during business trips abroad, learned foreign words at incredible speed. However, in this situation, everything seemed a little more complicated than just learning a language. Okuda began to wonder if Margot and Juno had brought him to this place specifically so that he could better master the local language. Although deep down he had hoped for something completely different, he was also interested in how their evening was going. Okuda turned his head towards Margot and noticed an unexpected and rather strange picture in front of him, which immediately caused an internal reaction in him. He mentally noted that if Sarasa found out about this, he would most likely tear Margot to pieces, but then decided that it was still Margot's personal business. Okuda turned his attention back to his conversation with Urina, wondering what topic he could choose to continue the conversation. An idea flashed through his mind that there was something interesting and unusual to discuss. And then his attention was distracted by music. He heard the bard singing and wondered what exactly the song was about. Okuda continued to communicate with Urina using paper and pens for correspondence. In order to understand what she was writing, he used his evaluation skill, which helped him decipher what was written. He realized that the essence of the song was this: on a distant mountain located in the west, a great tree has been growing for 10,000 years. In the roots of this tree, there is a flower that shines golden, brighter than the sun itself, and it is called Urina. This sacred tree is guarded by powerful divine beasts. According to an ancient legend, the nectar of this flower has the ability to heal any disease. It can be used to make an elixir if mixed with other rare ingredients, the herb Irene and the healing plant Melane, adding to them the hair of a divine beast. Okuda noted to himself that all of this was extremely interesting and informative. He thanked Urina for such an amazing story, expressing his sincere gratitude. In his mind, he confirmed his earlier guess that girls in bars really could be the best teachers of foreign languages. He remembered that his friend had not lied when he told him about it. When the meeting came to an end, the girls said goodbye, inviting them to come again. Margot confidently confirmed that they would definitely come back. Okuda also thought that he would like to visit this place again to continue his conversation with Urina. After leaving the tavern, Margot asked if Okuda liked it. He responded enthusiastically that the evening had been magnificent. He thought that everything really turned out exactly as Margot and Juno had planned. They were worried about him because he hardly interacted with women. Okuda understood that if it weren't for his friend's initiative, he himself would never have decided to come to such a place. He believed that meeting Urina was possible solely thanks to the efforts of Margot and Juno. Okuda spoke kindly to the puppy Ash, surprised by her appearance. He didn't immediately understand how she ended up here. At that moment, Sarasa and Elsa appeared in front of him. He realized that the situation had changed and announced that he was going to go home and go to bed. However, Sarasa suddenly grabbed him and Margot and dragged them both home, not giving them a chance to object. Okuda apologized internally to his friends, feeling that what happened was partly his fault. He felt awkward because, although he didn't think he had done anything wrong, he still felt guilty. Inwardly, he reminded himself that he had the right to remain silent. Margot and Juno bowed before Sarasa and Elsa in respect, or perhaps repentance. Okuda noticed that the situation was gradually calming down. Ash the puppy suddenly turned around and started sniffing something. Okuda asked him what exactly he was doing. The puppy stuck his muzzle into Margot's pocket and pulled out some object. It turned out that this item belonged to one of the girls from the tavern. Sarasa noticed this and expressed suspicion, asking about the origin of the thing. Okuda felt a strong sense of anxiety and mentally thought that this was the end. He felt that perhaps right here and now he would pay for everything. However, Sarasa suddenly declared that he could go. Okuda took this as an opportunity to leave without consequences and said goodbye, apologizing. He thought that now his main task was to get home as quickly as possible, because there was no point in staying on this battlefield. Okuda was repairing the house on the roof and smelled some pleasant smell. From that moment he couldn't get her out of his head, and it seems that this is love. If so, it will soon pass. He is never in a romantic mood for long. He did all the work and noticed that it was already late, and the tavern was already opening, but despite the desire, he told himself that he had nothing to do with her. But on the other hand, he wanted to drink something tasty. There were many different drinks in the tavern that he would try. Besides, it was high time to learn the language. And yet, he decided that going to the tavern would be useful. He was nothing but trouble. In the end, he went to the tavern and even bought souvenirs that the girl really liked. She also added that it was a good snack to go with drinks. After that moment, Okuda visited her very often. He enjoyed spending time with her. But the more he enjoyed his time, there are moments when he comes back to reality. He doesn't brag, but at work he was popular with women, but he builds walls around his heart. He hurt people who became close to him. Noticing this, he felt so much pain that he began to hate himself. He could no longer act impulsively when it came to romantic relationships. He wondered if Urina guessed about his feelings. She gives all of herself just to chat, drink, and make him happy. He would never leave her. She really hears what he says. He is interested in this city and the world, and she was always interested in what he says. Maybe this is just a technique for seducing men, but he sees that she really likes spending time with him. He looked only at her. She shone like a star. He wanted to know more about her. He kept saying that he wanted to know her better. He wanted to know her secrets, and he would also reveal his secret to her. She agreed. Okuda would never have thought that the time spent with her would be so fulfilling. He returned home and thanked the man for looking after Ash. He also said that he was glad that everything was going well for him and Juno. The man smiled and suggested making a fire. It seemed like it was late autumn now. The winter would be so cold that the boys would be able to see diamond dust in the air, so Okuda had to prepare himself for the bitter cold. He said goodbye to Juno and the man, and left. Returning home, he got to work, that is, deciding what the gift would be. He began to rewrite in the book what he saw today. He was sure that Urina would be delighted, because she was a curious person, and she could still add recipes, but it was not so important to notice. At the end, he signed that the book was addressed to Urina from Keigo Okuda. The guy understood that the girl might think he had no taste, because he was going to give her a book he made with his own hands, but he still decided to see what would happen in the end. He lit the stove. The house became very warm, and now there was no need to worry about winter. Time passed. The guy came to Urina and brought her a book. The girl was very surprised by such a gift. The guy was amazed that she also gave him a book. And also a whole outfit. It was winter clothes that they wear in this country. He had to change into it right now. Okuda said that it was very warm, and Urina told him that he looked very good and asked if she could look at the contents of the book right now, and as soon as she started reading, she immediately realized that it was just wonderful, and at that moment Okuda realized that the work was worth it. The girl was amazed by the contents of the book and read it avidly. She offered Okuda to read her book too. She gave him a grimoire, The Basics of Survival, Ice Magic. She was so close when she explained what was written there, so the guy tried to concentrate on the text. There he learned to use ice magic, and added this ice to the drink. The guy was very happy when he succeeded. A new freezing skill was obtained. Then he realized that he could acquire skills from books. And now he understood how Urina made ice in the form of stones. He decided to try to test the magic. Despite the book, as with other spells, the amount of energy and time spent on it brings different results. He added ice to Urina's glass, for which she thanked him and offered to read the book together. Okuda thought that he liked his book, and he was happy to know it. It seemed like he spent so little time with her. When he and Urina time flew by, unnoticed, it was so easy, so calm with her. After a while, he returned to Juno and thanked the guys for looking after his pet and went home again. It was already night, so he lay down on the bed. It seemed to him that the reason why he did not want to get close to people was probably because of what his boss said. Being late is the same sin as murder. Because by being late, he was taking away other people's time, which meant that he was taking their lives. If you think about it, he was not always careful with other people, which meant that he was taking their lives. But in this world, he doesn't have that feeling. When he communicates with Juno, Margot, Sarasa, and Elsa, they may have slowed him down, but that's probably what friendship is. Then he started to think about Urina. Thinking about it, he realized that it was not about taking the lives of others, but about sharing his life with them. Perhaps it was his destiny. Although he just said something very romantic, he did not understand what was happening to him. The more he thought about the girl, the more he felt like he was plunging into a deep labyrinth. If he was asked if he liked her or was disgusted, he would answer that he liked her. He did not understand why love was so complicated. While thinking, he found himself in the city. He really didn't understand himself. He came here to buy winter clothes. While the cold weather was not in full swing, while he was here, he decided to give Urina another gift. It was a water dagger. The girl asked him if he was sure he wanted to give it to her and promised that she would take care of it. Someone started to disturb them with their voices. Okuda decided that next time he would need to bring a weapon with him. He couldn't ask the girl such a thing, but he wondered if the other visitors gave her anything. His soul was very heavy. He trained during the day because he still felt weak, but he promised that he would train more to become stronger. He saw his pet scratching against the wall and decided to see what was there. If there was a monster behind the wall, he could aim from above. And there really was a monster bear behind the wall, but it was different from the usual ones. Okuda used the evaluation on it. It turned out to be a red-furred grizzly. It was a rare variety of grizzly, autumnal and red, and if they are fire elements, water should work well against it. He began loading the crossbow with arrows and aiming. He fired and hit him, but he didn't understand whether he killed him. He couldn't see anything. Because the grizzly began to glow very brightly, it turned out that at that moment he came very close, and at the last moment Okuda managed to kill him in the head. His level increased, and he was able to make food from this bear. It was very tasty, the first time he ate such fresh bear meat. Their meat turned out to be softer than earthly bears. He also made a potion with an egg, but it seems he can't help but try it. After drinking the contents of the bottle, he felt that his body became lighter. Igiru's healing potion, it restored body parts. It was the strongest restorative potion that Okuda had so far, but he didn't really want to drink it. When he knew what it was made of, he decided to ask Sarasu to sew a quilt from bear skin and got ready to go to the city. And he took a small bottle with him. He brought Sarasa the skin and asked her to take care of it. There was something else for which he came to the city. This is the residence. He was very nervous when he drove up to it. He stood in front of the residence of Mr. Bowron. The guard Tony recognized him. Okuda told him that he came to see the master. He was escorted to him. They came to the master's office. Kega was asked to look out the window. There he saw the master. It seemed to him that he seemed to have a lot of free time, like a retired lord. Tony told the guy that he would meet him right after the walk. The guy immediately began to take out a bottle, a potion of healing body parts, also known as a Giru potion, and was wondering if it would have any effect. Bayeren came to the office, and he and the guard were very surprised that such a potion existed. Tony asked to drink it. Kigo understood that it was a very valuable potion and should not be drunk like that, but if he hid it, he would be tormented by nightmares. Bayeren immediately began to feel a surge of strength. And Keigo was right. The master's hand was indeed restored. With this potion, he would no longer be so helpless, and it was better not to tell him what was in this potion. Now Keigo had finished all his business in this residence. He said that he would go home, but Bayeren stopped him and snapped his finger. It was rude to refuse the gift, so he should accept it happily. To survive in this world, you need to have at least some money. After all, there are no marketplaces here, and people will not understand what he is talking about. And in the meantime, winter was already coming, and Kigo thought that there were still a lot of monsters that he would encounter. Suddenly, he felt a little depressed. He scratched Ash, who was also afraid of the cold, and decided that it would be better to look forward to the snowfall and play snowballs than he would dress up as Santa and give gifts to Urina. There was no Christmas in this world, even if it was. Christmas is usually spent with family. The guy became very curious if his quilt was ready. He went to the store where he took his quilt and asked the girl to keep the change. Keigo's money. In fact, he just thought that counting change was a headache. Explaining all this was also a headache, so he just took the money. He went back to his house. The stove was already lit. Besides, he covered himself with his blanket and said that it was very warm. He thought he could survive the winter. He started playing with Ash, but suddenly someone knocked on his door. Juno and Elsa came. It seemed like this was the first time they came to visit him alone, plus the guy still had bear meat, so he decided to treat them with it. They all really liked it. If Keigo remembered correctly, Elsa doesn't drink, so he poured her some juice, and himself and Juno some drinks. He supposed it was hard not to drink. When you run a tavern, unexpectedly the guys turned to Keigo at the same time. They both wanted to tell him something. So Juno decided to speak first and asked the guy if he was dating Urina. Keigo thought that the guys came just to ask this. Everything is complicated, so he just dodged the question and asked what they were even talking about. Juno understood him, and they didn't ask anything else. Time passed. The guys had already started to leave. He hadn't gone to the tavern the night before, but still, everything was fine. Going to the tavern wasn't some kind of duty after all. He decided to do some housework. He wouldn't be able to collect water when it snowed, but he would be able to melt the ice that would collect. They would be able to fill the bathtubs much faster, and they had water in stock, so today they could take a bath, so that's what the guy did. Romance in movies and real life are very different. You need to make an effort to live each day. Installing the bath and thinking about everything that was happening took Keigo all day. The next cold day came. The guy was building something and saying that because he still had to get married, his boss was constantly telling him that he had to compromise. Didn't that mean sacrificing himself for others? The guy thought he should have the freedom to choose how he wanted to live. Unlike romance, being able to survive is much more important. Romance is a complicated thing and there are monsters all over the world. It was interesting that if the dragon attacks again, will he be able to protect Urina? Even protecting himself seems impossible. There must be someone more capable for her than him. He brought Margot a dagger. He signed some papers and left again. On the way he thought, why is he so lost? He doesn't know what to do. Doing nothing, he felt so ordinary, and again he wanted to break all ties with people. If you think about it, the only entertainment he had was taking a bath, eating, fishing, and writing. There is no internet or games. In the era where there is no internet and social media, people can only communicate with each other. However, as everything around them develops, they will be able to communicate with each other all over the world. At the same time, all this had the opposite effect. He was used to the way they communicated with each other before. You could exchange just a few phrases and end the conversation. You can protect your heart from invasion. When it comes to romance, your heart becomes heavy. In fact, most of the pain in the heart is due to love. People prefer to choose the path without pain. After all, everything came from our ancestors. When the heart works beyond its capabilities, a person will be able to feel his love. The birth rate is also declining because of this. People just can't get married. Keigo thought about Urine a lot, so he thinks that his heart is also at the limit, and then his mind starts to resist. Even though he loved her, his mind refused, and he contradicted himself again. Such behavior should be natural. Now he sat alone and understood that he should feel better. After he dug into himself, he realized that there was no person on the planet more unhappy than him. Meanwhile, in the tavern, the guys were having fun and drinking, but suddenly Urina came running, who seemed to be in trouble. Keigo was sitting in nature and fishing. In the reflection he saw himself, and said that he looked like a dead man. As usual, and every time, he doesn't even know what to do. He is an outlier in this world in every way. He thought it would be a useful change of scenery. He didn't even understand how he got to the river and back. It was sad. But in any case, as long as he is alive, it means he needs to eat and continue doing what he does. He had cooked a fish whose roe could be pickled in salt and chilled with ice cream. He could make a cod snack. He had some chilies in the shed, and if they were pickled together, they could create a new flavor. But when he went outside, he saw Ash barking at the fence. He saw girls there. He opened the fence, and they ran in. The guy asked what happened. Ash's reaction, they were probably being chased by monsters. He didn't want any trouble, so he closed the fence behind him and said that it was better to go inside the house. The girls thanked him for his help. Keigo didn't know what was going on. The girls started to undress, but the guy told them that he didn't think they should relax too much in the house of an unknown man, and asked them to put their fur coats back on. Suddenly Ash fell silent. The guy became interested in whether there were traces of monsters outside, and said that he would look outside. The girls with shaking hands offered him to sleep with them. He understood that they were tired of running, but they still offered it to him. He refused and said that the bed he was about to show them was for guests. He led them into the room, lit the stove, and left them there. He did not understand why they were alone in the city, and explained to them that they probably had their own reasons. He did not blame them for this. It was night now. He would ask them to leave in the morning, and he himself went to reconnaissance. After making sure that everything was okay, he returned home, drank something, and decided to go and rest. Because he was not feeling very well, he fell asleep, but was awakened by a light that suddenly appeared in the room. These were girls who came into his room and climbed onto the bed. He asked them to stop and leave, but they did not listen to him, so he had to climb onto the table. and then he was about to run out into the street, but a man burst into the house, who said that these were his girls. Keigo did not understand what was happening. The man asked where the potion was. Keigo did not understand how he knew about the partial action potion, but if he meant the potion that healed the right hand of that nobleman, then someone revealed the secret. The man began to attack Keigo, but he set his hair on fire and kicked him out of the house. He assumed that he might have been sent by Heinrich. The man ran away. Keigo began to think what to do next. He looked at the girls and realized that he did not know what he was doing. He did not really imagine the right time to send the girls out into the cold. Behind the fence, he saw a cart with Margot. The guy didn't expect to see them. The guys were very scared for Keigo. They told him everything, and the situation became clear. It turned out that the girls were drugged. Urina talked to the employees of the beauty salon. It turned out that the former Mohawk was a bandit from the red light district. He ordered 3 beauties, whom he chose in the lantern district, to attack Kino and kidnap him. Urina learned about this plan through her connections in the entertainment district. She told Margot and the others, and they hurried to the scene. The girls were sent to sleep in the blacksmith's hut. Margot approached Keigo and whispered to him that Urina was very worried about him. After that, they decided to have a party. Keigo tried to invite the 3 kidnappers, but they were too embarrassed and refused. There was little food, but it was already late, so they would have to make do with this. He thanked the guys for waiting and said that today there was a new dish on the menu. Cheese and cod roe. The guys were happy about this too. They said with amazement that it was very tasty. And also the fact that it's great to eat together. Urina started pouring drinks. Keigo asked her if he could talk to her outside, and they went out together. For some reason, he stopped showing up at her store without saying anything. It was very cold outside, so the girl immediately began to shiver. Keigo was amazed that she rushed after him in such thin clothes, so he had to apologize to her. He put a fur coat on her, and they looked at the sky together. It started snowing. Now Urina looked like an angel with perfectly white wings. She smiled widely. Keigo apologized to her for not going into her shop. He had to tell her what he wanted. He had to tell her how he felt before Urina disappeared with this light snow. The girl asked him why he was thinking. Keigo replied that he couldn't stop thinking about her and admitted that he loved her. And the girl replied that she loved him too. They looked into the distance with relief. Then the guy shook the snow off the girl, but she asked in surprise what happened. Tears appeared in his eyes. Keigo thought that it seemed like he started crying without even realizing it. At that moment, the desire that so powerfully took hold of his heart, it seemed to him that it would disappear along with the melting snow. If Urina was in trouble, he would be the first to come to her aid. Whenever she was sad, he wanted to be with her. He answered her that everything was fine. The tears came by themselves. He was ready to be her shield and sword. On this fantastic night where the wings of angels dance in the air, Ash jumped out from somewhere. It turned out that the guys were watching their confessions, and everyone immediately felt awkward. But a moment later, they began to congratulate Keigo and Urina. The young people looked at each other with affection. After that, they chatted cheerfully with the guys about their love with Urina. Everyone got drunk. Keigo never dreamed that they would have such a fun and happy night, that everything would turn out exactly like this. They all lay down next to each other on the floor and fell asleep. The guy decided that in any case it was getting closer to morning. He had to cook rice soup for everyone, except for Urina, who quickly sobered up. He had such a hangover that he lay there for another 2 days. In the morning, everyone was already getting ready to leave. Each of them had their own job. The guy said goodbye to Keigo, and he gave Urina a blanket. He learned a few words in the local language. Urina also learned a few words in Japanese, and they were both a little happy. They all agreed to see each other later and said goodbye. Keigo was left alone, but he started sneezing, and Ash said that everything was fine. It was time to go home. It had only been a few hours since everyone had left, but Keigo already wanted to see Urina. He didn't want to be alone. He was very lonely. He took his things and ran out into the street. I set off on my way. On the way, he was wondering if Urina was still working in that establishment. He was sure she was used to dealing with drunk men, and as soon as he imagined it, he became furious. He understood that she was free to do whatever she wanted. Interfering would mean limiting her freedom. He knew that this was not a very good idea. But now he is losing control of his feelings. He knows that he should not be so impulsive, but he could not help himself. He came to the tavern. Margot and the others were already asleep because it was midnight. He did not want to wake them up, so he decided not to call them. He himself approached the doors of the tavern, but he felt very ashamed. He had come a long way and was already standing in front of his goal. He He was so worried that he did not attach any significance to his excitement. But if there was ever a moment in his life when he needed to act, that moment was probably now. He opened the doors and entered the establishment. He immediately saw Urina, who was being looked at lovingly. The guy closed her off from everyone and took her aside. He asked her not to be afraid. The girl understood that he was worried about her and thanked him, but the visitors were not at all happy. With his appearance, Ash began to bark, and all the girls gathered around him touched. They started touching him one by one and saying that he was their little furry client. Kigo thought that it seemed like they didn't have any problems with pets. Ash was popular wherever he went, like he was the mascot of the place. Urina showed Kigo where the two of them would sit and started pouring drinks. But suddenly a woman came up to them. She was the mother of the whole enterprise. Every time he saw her, for some reason his danger sensor went off. He felt that he shouldn't go against her, and he was glad when she just came up to say hello. He thought she would break something, because he came with a dog. Bandits entered the building, saw Urina, and immediately reached out to her. Kigo understood that they were the kind of people you shouldn't mess with, but they approached him themselves. The man began to point to his head and say something in the local language. The guy immediately realized that it was the guy with the mohawk that he set on fire. He sympathized about the hair, but Urina worked here, so he needed to sort it out peacefully so as not to bring even more trouble to her. He had little on hand. Since he gave most of it to the nobleman, he took out a bottle of potion and told the man to drink it. He himself did not know if this potion would be suitable for hair, but the man drank it anyway. And the mohawk grew again. Kigo had some kind of feeling of déjà vu, and the hair seemed even longer than before. Everyone was happy for the man that he had hair again. The young man thought that now he could relax and enjoy a drink with Urina, but the man grabbed her hand and said that they were not finished talking yet. The guy jumped up and set his hair on fire again with a fire sword, and the mistress hit him in the stomach, so he fell to the ground. Kigo thanked the woman. He asked Urina if everything was okay. He didn't know that even Mrs. Urina would be in danger and it was no longer safe for her to work here. He told her that they would leave here together. He turned to the woman. The manager of the establishment explained that he was taking Urina. He mentally begged her to let him through because now was not the time for words. The owner actually seemed much scarier than those bandits. So Kigo took out a bag with 300 gold coins and gave it to the woman. For him, Urina was more important than any money. The girl also asked the owner to let her go. She didn't want to do it, but still agreed. Urina hugged her and thanked her. The woman promised to distract the bandits while the guys ran away, and that's what happened. The bandits tried to grab Urina, but the woman stopped them and fought them off. It didn't last long. Urina and Kigo weren't able to run that far, so they turned into an alley and ran deeper. They hid behind a barrel. Kigo immediately began to think how to protect the girl. He froze the puddle, but he had very little mana left, so he needed to somehow replenish it. He used wind on some girl, and her skirt rose up. The bandits paid attention to this, and they immediately rushed towards her, but because they were on ice, they slipped and fell. The guy checked if they were alive, and then Urina grabbed him and told him not to dare lift her skirt for him. The guy apologized to her, and they went to his cart. As he heard, the bandits were arrested, and now they will not threaten them, and besides, he took their weapons with him. They reached the gate, where a guard greeted them. The guys did not stop and drove on. Then they kissed, and all the howling that night died down. The snow stopped falling, as if nature was congratulating them. In the silence of the road, where only the sound of the carriage could be heard, the girl wrote a letter to the boy. If it became difficult for him to be with her, if they could no longer bear each other's pain, then he could leave her. She, of course, could cry, but she still wanted to be with him, because she loved him so much. Urina knew all about Kigo's urges to disconnect, and his misanthropic nature. She accepted him, even prepared her own figurative escape route for him. He didn't even know how someone could be so kind to him. He was just an irregular factor in this world, and he wondered if one day he suddenly woke up and found himself in Japan. If tomorrow he was suddenly separated from Urina and Ash. He was sure his heart would be broken. He couldn't let Urina know about this. He couldn't live without her anymore. This is how his life with Urina began. He hoped that they would grow old like this, and when they became grandparents, he wanted to tell her every day that he loved her. He was sure that everything would be fine for them, no matter what. After a while, Urina heard someone knocking on their door. Guests had come to them. It was Margot and Juno. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. It turned out that Urina had left her things with them. Kigo was interested in how the mother from Urina's former place of work was doing. They moved all the things into the house, Juno was talking to the girl, Margot at that moment was thanking Keigo for the cheese, and Cod Row, he said that if you think about it, they ran out of ingredients, so they need to go fishing. The guy decided that he would go fishing and asked to guard the house. Marco agreed. They kissed Urina in front of the guys, and they happily began to look at him. Keigo blushed and went to the river. He missed Ash's warmth, so he needed to finish and get home as quickly as possible, but at the edge of the road, he saw something. It was something strange. It was full of holes. And looking closer, he realized that these holes were made by thorns. Suddenly, he was attacked from behind, but the shield blocked the spikes. It was a new kind of monster. The guy did not expect this. He used the appraisal skill. It turned out that the monster was a giant echinoderm, very similar to a sea urchin. Perhaps the number of servants being killed has increased, and maybe the ecosystem is collapsing, which is why this ooze appeared in the river. The guy took out a thunder sword, and defending his horse went on the attack. Then he hid behind a rock and realized that these spikes are specially located for equal intervals of time, and when he shoots, several others are needed to reload. While reloading, he jumped out to deliver his first blow, and he succeeded. He was able to kill this hedgehog. His level increased. While the water was cold, the guy decided to gut the monster. Then he used the assessment, but the analysis was only superficial, which looked very promising. The guy ate a piece of hedgehog. And even the purple sea urchin that grew on first-class kelp was not as delicious as this one, and this size was even a little scary. He went to the cart and loaded the urchin. The guy was so excited that he screamed loudly. He needed to take the prey home as soon as possible before new monsters attacked. He returned home. The boys were very surprised by his catch, and if you think about it, they had never eaten something like sashimi, and probably had never eaten such a grotesque creature. He began to cook with the catch. The first thing he put on the table was sea urchin in salt water. He hoped that everyone would be able to appreciate its taste. The guys tried it with apprehension. Keigo at first did not understand what their reaction was, but then the guys started saying that it was great, very tasty, and now Keigo was moving on to the main course. He said that to get the texture of the sea urchin, you had to mix the dish with an egg, and a soft, fluffy omelet with cheese and urchin was ready. He was happy when his friends enjoyed his food. After they all ate, they asked for more. When everyone went to rest, Keigo decided to go to the bath. It was high time for him to rest. In winter, it was best to swim in the open air, because it is always warm when you get into the water. The sky is clear and the stars are beautiful. The feeling that his frozen body is relaxing was simply irresistible. Someone knocked on the guy's door. He thought it was Margot. I asked if the food had really run out. But it was Urina. The guy was very scared when he saw her without clothes. He asked her what happened. She climbed into the water closer to him. They sat back to back. Keigo felt that women in this world were very persistent. She turned to him. The girl stood up and asked to look at her body. The guy began to turn around because he thought that in the end he was a man, but he couldn't. He jumped out of the water and ran into the house. He realized that the main culprit of all this was Juno and called her a pervert. She began to apologize, and the dissatisfied Urina also entered the house. She was angry because the guy left her alone. Keigo came up to her and said that he loved her very much and started apologizing. He saw Margot and Juno looking at him mockingly and didn't understand why they were doing this, because it was their fault. Then night fell and the boys went to bed. Keigo was still sitting at his desk and writing something. In another world, he was, without exaggeration, a recluse, Urina, the love of his life, the girl he treasures very much. Now he has someone to protect, this time for real. That's what really matters. He can't pretend to be a lone wolf anymore. However, he still has a problem. It is that aristocrat Heinrich, who sends his thugs after them, he likes this house. But if Urina is in danger because of the location, that is another matter. They had a lot of money, and the chickens are fine, so they can leave. But the guy stopped these thoughts and said that he would stay because he was not alone. When he woke up tomorrow, he would talk to the guys. On this day, he told everyone the whole truth, that he had cured Master Byron's right hand with a potion, and about the attack on Urina, that the thieves were most likely sent by Byron's son Heinrich. The conclusion they came to was the same as the one he had come to last night. If the aristocrats in power took the matter seriously, he would most likely be captured before he could resist. He and Urina would leave this house. They would leave here by carriage. Margot gave Keigo a map. A map of the surroundings of the kingdom of Lancaster. He hadn't needed it until now, but it would be useful for a quick overview. The guy thanked the man. Urina told Keigo that she had never set out on a journey before. She couldn't wait. Margot agreed with her and said that such a trip was a fun event. He would definitely go and overthrow this Henry, and then come for him, but for now he could enjoy the trip with Urina and they would take care of the rest. Keigo thanked Margot and said that since they had decided, they could pack their things already. The chickens will go to a farmer who knows Sarasu. Margot will go with Juno, who partly hunts monsters. They will also take Elsa. Keigo didn't want to cause them any extra problems, but he just had to make sure they said goodbye. Between packing his things, the guy wrote a letter to his best friends. He asked them to read the letters when they were alone. There was one more important thing. He would be traveling together with Urina, and he had to take a step. The flower gave it to her, but the girl did not understand this. He promised that he would love her all his life and protect her from harm. After that, he wondered if he had said it well. In any case, he would never find words to describe her beauty. The girl, in response with tears in her eyes, said that she would love him all her life. He was her sun that shines every day. The oath that Sarasa taught him was said by him. It means a happy marriage. He also gave a special flower, before escaping, a wedding just for the two of them. Ash barked that Keigo was a real priest. After this, the guy felt a strange sense of courage. He reminded the boys once again that he had left them letters, and now he was setting off on a journey. Farewells were difficult. They couldn't stay in this place any longer. It was only going to get harder and harder. Keigo didn't think they would ever come back here. Margot said he was going to overthrow the nobility, but honestly, he didn't think it would happen. He hoped that the guys would take care of themselves and be happy. He would protect Urina. The wolves ran at the same level as them. Urina was happy about this. Keigo asked her what Margot gave him. The girl answered that it was a means of self-defense. It was a slingshot. If you add an attribute to the projectile, then it seems that it can be a real weapon, and apparently Heinrich collected them because she got it from him. Keigo was almost certain that Heinrich was hunting him, and he didn't think he would ever live to regret his decisions. That potion should never have been seen in public. They were on the brink of disaster, and there was nothing better than going on a trip that didn't involve anything like that. He would take this as a good opportunity and look at it from the bright side. They were going to Tirana. It was dangerous to drive at night on unfamiliar roads. Even though the wolves were helping them, they couldn't let their guard down. They stopped for a rest. At times, it was like a honeymoon for Keigo. The honeymoon, horseback riding under the stars, was very romantic. But where they stayed, the guys were in full view. And the carriage was without a roof, but Keigo had 3,000 gold coins. And with the money he could buy a covered carriage, he wondered if the other guys were looking at the moon now and fell asleep with Urina. The next day came. Suddenly birds flew out from behind the trees. Keigo immediately became wary because there was an incomprehensible sound. It turned out to be a cockatrice monster. Urina wanted to cover him, but the guy said that it was too dangerous. She needed to move away. He understood that he was no longer alone, and they would survive together. The monster had not noticed them yet, but just in case he decided to conduct an assessment on him, new information appeared. Keigo used his summon and sent the wolves to attack and eat the cockatrice. Now the monster couldn't attack because it was being held back. Next time he would use a poison arrow to kill it for sure, and it actually worked. Now all that was left was to finish off the monster. His summoned creature had attacked him, and now there would be poisonous breath from the cockatrice. The guy shouted to the blue wolf to retreat, but the wolf didn't have time. Keigo understood that things were bad, but Urina came to the rescue. They attacked the monster together. Suddenly Keigo had a level up, but he didn't care about this level. He poured a detox potion into the wolf's mouth. He thought it would help, but it didn't. They made a grave for him, and Keigo buried him. He thanked him for protecting them and for wanting to be with them until the end. He did not feel weak. He was filled with strength, as if in honor of the triumphant return of the hero. Henry was unhappy with the reports from the bandits who had carried out 2 unsuccessful operations. In addition, the guys had managed to escape. He asked them what the hell was going on here, and he didn't need an apology. He demanded a result. They began to tell him that according to the mafioso they hired, Johnny and his gang of 7 devils, a man named Keigo, seemed to be a very dangerous person. If this happens, they will make their move, tie up Keigo and Urina and bring them to him. They will sit at Heinrich's feet. He laughed in response and asked to forget about it and get on with their main business. The man rang the bell. A servant came and was told to call the captain to his office, and for him to gather about 50 people. He told the master that he could rely on him. Henry thought that since Jill would be present in person, it seemed like Keigo wouldn't survive today. If they took his girlfriend hostage, he would have no choice but to make a potion to restore body parts, and he had already made arrangements with the Church Inquisition for a special torture chamber. he would make the boys regret it, and they could no longer count on a decent life. But as with the dagger, someone will definitely rise up. They took complete control of the city council. They even managed to attract such an influential person as the Adventurers Guildmaster Shulag to their camp. Now Heinrich believed that he was no longer his father's toy, and executing or imprisoning them would be difficult, because it would damage his image. At least his henchmen could be driven out of Leicester. After that house arrest would relieve him of that problem, Henry decided that, for starters, Donnie and the others could drive his father's lieutenants out of the city. That day, Kago sent each of the boys a letter. He said that reading each other's letters was strictly forbidden. He wrote to Margon that he knew it was a little awkward, but he was writing to him. He said that he was going to overthrow Henry, but he hoped that he wouldn't take it too seriously. Everything would be fine with him and Urina. If they were pressed, they would run away in the other direction. When he first came to this world, Margot sold him weapons and armor for free. He was very grateful to him for this. Without it, he would have been killed by monsters. Then he began to come to his house at every opportunity. It was very annoying, but it was fun. He knew that he could be a little unsociable, and knows that he goes out of his way to keep him company. He thanked Margot for being there. Without saying a word, he felt that this was the only thing that saved him. The guy asked Margot to take care of everyone in Leicester, especially the adventurers, because their lives depend on the dragon's anvil, and he wished the best for him and Sarasa, and to keep Sarasa and Elsa in the dark about his thoughts about not being able to return to Leicester. He didn't like to talk much, so he left everything as it was, and he hoped he would understand why. The man squeezed this letter and wished Kago to take care of himself. Then there was a letter to Jun. Kago wrote that he was embarrassed to talk about it. He told Margot he felt like he would never return to Leicester. That's why he wrote to him. He was indebted to him. Because they defeated Cockatrice together, he couldn't have done it alone, and it was hard work, but when they did it, he felt great. When he lost his heart to Sarasa, he was so exhausted and depressed that he didn't know what to do, but he was very happy that he found Elsa. He was going to go north to the city of Tarant, and then he would continue to travel and protect Urina until she was safe. A man protects a woman he is in love with, and he should understand that. He apologized, and admitted that he would stay with them forever if he could, but it seemed that the situation did not allow it. He asked to look after everyone in Leicester, and asked not to worry, because he would be happy with Urina. And finally, he asked not to get involved in too many adventures, and not to make Elsa cry, but to make her happy, and not to tell Sarasa and Elsa that he was unlikely to return. They would probably talk about it, and his hut would come in handy when they went to the forest, so they could use it if he wanted. He could live with Elsa. Sarasa had the key, and said goodbye to him. Jun said that he would definitely help him, and wished him luck in his first big adventure. Kigo also wrote to Sarasa. He wrote that maybe she was worried that he wouldn't be able to return to Leicester, but he promised that he would return, and Ash, who she always cared about, would miss her. When he first came here, she made a deal for herself. When he didn't know what was good and what was bad, she kindly introduced him to the Adventurers Guild. Without her, he would have died long ago. He also started to tell her that the raw sea urchin he ate yesterday was an egg from a water monster's nest. He wanted to feed them to Juno and Elsa, but he probably wouldn't be able to do it anytime soon. They were in the river where he usually goes, so she could ask Margot and Juno to bring them to her. Their weakness was lightning, and he also asked her to tell them to be careful of the spikes, because they fly at the enemy every 3 seconds. He wrote so much that it's hard to summarize, so he'll leave it as is. Eliza, that she had been very kind to him. He would definitely return to Leicester to see how she was doing. She could use his hut as she liked, along with June. He didn't mind if they lived there. June was inclined to adventurers, so he would be grateful if she looked after him and didn't worry too much. She had always protected Ash, and he was sorry that they wouldn't see each other for so long. That's how fate had worked out. The girl showed the letter to Jun. He said that he understood what her letter was saying. Kago wished them happiness. He was not going to say goodbye. Juno told Elizabeth that he would sometimes clean and stay with her. But Margot was very unhappy. He called Kago a misanthrope, who didn't even want to live in Leicester. He didn't understand how he was going to live without their help. The man was in despair. He believed that Kago should be free. He started writing a letter to Master Bairn and everyone else he knew. He was going to defeat Henry and save his friends. That was all he could think about at that moment. Ash spoke in his own language, that this precious name was given to him by the Master. He sees the color of the soul of a creature because a spot comes out of its body. Master and Urina together, their soul color is as bright as a fire. Since Master and Urina are together again, he is glad that the color of his soul shines more beautifully than before. Saris and Elsa. He was sad to say goodbye to them, The memories of the time spent there warm his soul, but now he has fun and adventures with Uncle Blue Wolf. Uncle Blue Wolf taught him many things. He told him directions and where villages were, and also the wolf village. There was a giant sacred tree there that was said to be over 10,000 years old, and when a wolf dies, he becomes one with the tree and turns into a heroic spirit. That's why wolves are brave and can stand up to the strongest enemies. Ash is the next master, so he needs to develop slowly and not rush. But next time he must learn to speak well. The wolf was so kind, sometimes strict and courageous. But cockatrice killed him. He and his uncle's friends sang a requiem for Wolverine. His soul disappeared into the sky with a warm glow. He was returned to the vessel of his soul. The wolves said that Master Kago was a very strong man. He even defeated Ash's mother, who was their master. Ash knew about it, but only vaguely. He barely remembered his mother. However, she attacked the master, and the master defeated her. That's all he knew. Ash was a wolf like the others. He thought that the law of the jungle was normal. The owner and uncle too fought for life, for protection. If he loses to a stronger opponent, then he dies. That's all. So Ash was not going to think of the owner as an enemy of his mother. He is not only strong, but also kind, and most importantly, he has a very beautiful soul. So he will continue to fight for his mother and uncle, who are watching Ash from the tree. He will fight for the owner. The wolves recognize that the little one became stronger. They did everything they could. Having left the place where the boys buried the blue wolf, they continued their journey to the city of Tyrant. And after a while, they were finally there. According to Urina, wandering artists come to this city, although it is huge, but they should be careful not to leave traces. The girl looked tired, and there was nothing surprising about it. Because they had already spent several nights in the cart, they had come to one of the inns. It was not yet clear how far they would have to go, so he thought that he should provide the girl with the necessary respite. He paid the boy to look after their things and do some small shopping for them. He promised that everything would be ready by morning. They had a kitchen and a shower in their apartment, and the room was very nice. The guy said that they would have a good rest today, but suddenly the girl came up to the guy and said that she didn't want him to run away today. Time passed. In the morning, the guy, as he said, brought everything that was ordered from him, including a cart with a roof, and he bought an excellent horse. The guy was paid for the work. Kago named the horse Queen May. The boy said it was just a wonderful name. The young man asked the boy to help him carry his things. He, in response, asked how many silver coins he would give him, but it was just a joke. Urina went outside and handed him a piece of paper. It said that the girl wanted to see the city. They were only in the next town, and Kago was going to rush off and go as far as possible, but Urina wanted to at least look around a little. So the guy replied that, of course, since they were in the city, they would take a walk, and they went for a walk. They reached the circus, where they had a lot of fun. After the walk, they checked out of the hotel. They would have enjoyed a tour of the city, but perhaps they shouldn't stay here too long. And Kago's premonition did not fail him. They did not yet know that they were a hair's breadth from danger. Henry was disappointed that he could not catch him. As soon as he received information from a noble from Tyrant about the location of Kago, he called the Jiru Corps in pursuit, but the permanent courtyard where they stayed was already empty. At the same time, he, accusing Kago of a crime, gave the order to paste up an advertisement about his search throughout the city. But even so, he could not be caught. It turns out that Kago is not so easy. He even thought about putting a big reward on him, but that would be boring if he died. There was a chance that if Henry overdid it, other nobles would notice his talent. This potion belonged only to him, and he had no choice but to do it secretly, and then to force him to submit. He would order Urina to be tortured in front of him. He told the guards to get him a horse, and he needed a new woman. He was going to give the guy a taste of humiliation. Johnny, meanwhile, was a street thug. He grew up in the slums and had a huge rival. He was also hurt in his times, but thanks to his minions, he began to have fun. In the end, he became the owner of such a magnificent mohawk, and every time he is praised, he is filled with happiness. One day they received an order. The client was an elderly gentleman with a white beard. Although he behaved somewhat atypically, after they began to implement his plan, the first stage was seduction, the second was kidnapping. Hotch, everything ended in failure. They even lost their weapons, and as a final touch, Johnny even managed to lose his precious mohawk. Next came a description of Urina, who worked in a tavern, and although the establishment was small, she still perceived it as a family. Each had their own past, which the guys carried within themselves, and this concerned her too. She had an older brother named Sato. Burns, cutting, tying up, violence, offensive words. Their childhood was filled with unbearable things. Because of this, when the girl was 7 years old, her mother committed suicide. Once, while their father was not looking, the boys ran away. They lived on their own in the slums. The brother always gave his sister more food, but he himself remained hungry. But everything had its limit. He fainted due to illness. And unfortunately, soon after fainting, he died. Life lost its meaning, and sitting on the edge of the road, the girl waited for the embrace of death, but someone extended a hand to her. Large hands lifted her up effortlessly as she tried to speak. She still remembers how much warmth and kindness was in them. Like wings, they embraced her. The one who picked her up was her owner, Josephine. She not only took her in, but also provided her with food, a clean bed, and let her recover. When her vision began to clear and her voice returned, the girl began to cry, hugging the woman. And then she began to help her around the house. Soon it grew into working in the tavern. Everyone who worked there had their own obligations. They did not ask the girl about anything and accepted her very warmly. While the peaceful days flew by, the wound in the girl's heart slowly healed. At times, her mother taught her a defense technique. At first, she did not understand why, but now she fully understands the meaning of her actions. Children are often kidnapped, sold and used as toys for the nobility, and her mother has already saved her twice. Coming to her brother's grave, the girl told him about her new life and work, and it seemed that he too was overwhelmed with feelings. Then she learned that her father had passed away. In the tavern, she met the very man with whom she was going to connect her life. It was Keigo. Now the guy was sitting and thinking about the fact that Urina mentioned that she liked the red gerbera flowers blooming in the roadside dirt, and this is certainly not an elegant flower. For its resilience, the flower gives her strength, the girl told him about her past, and since she was able to open up to him, it means she trusts him. The guy even thought that she probably thought he didn't notice, but since they started living together, the girl became less shy about showing her tattoos, and he was very surprised, not by the number of tattoos because it seemed to be the fashion of this world, but by how easily Urina undressed. For the first time in his life, the guy felt pure love for someone. He was ready to bet that he would never again meet such a wonderful person as Urina. One day they were attacked by a giant sea urchin, but the boys together dealt with it very easily. Then they prepared dinner, they divided the responsibilities between themselves, and lived in peace. They cooked delicious food together, and then they went to bed. Sometimes Urina fell asleep not on the bed, so Keigo took care of her and moved her. He could go to bed himself, but that would not be entirely right, because he was no longer alone. When he first visited her place of work, the girl was different from the rest of the staff. Although she gave a sense of calm, she herself preferred to stay away from men, and her tattoos only hid her mental scars. Despite all the problems, she could still smile and be happy because she was surrounded by amazing people. All the girls in that place carry their own past, but they get along with each other because their mother saved them. When her friends asked Urina if she would be lonely, she replied that on the contrary, she was happy to go on a trip. This place is her true home, so one day he would like to take her back there, and if she were a person without a single flaw, he is sure that he would never fall in love with her so much. She did everything in her power to survive in the harsh and lonely conditions. Just like Gerbera, perhaps that is why he fell in love with her, he decided to express his apologies and sincere feelings in the form of a letter. And when the girl wakes up tomorrow, he will show her how much he loves her. The next morning, but the girl seemed offended. The guy wished her good morning, and everything immediately passed. It turned out that he had not confessed his love to her last night. It had completely slipped his mind. That's why the girl was unhappy. He gave her a letter and asked her to read it. She read his letter over and over again, like the picture book he gave her. Even though they were close, it was like he exchanged a letter with a girl from another country. They confessed their love to each other again. Keigo was in love with her every day.